Gentlemen, we have been looking forward to this day. We have asked Michael Sharp to come in and talk to us about finance. If you'll look in your syllabus, this actually belongs back in section number 1. And so as you organize your notebook, you'll want to put this material back there. We've asked Michael to speak because of a variety of expertise that he has in the area of the preacher and his finance. And I asked him for a bio, and it's very impressive. He wants the condition, as we all would, that this was solicited. He didn't just hand me this, but it is very impressive. He currently holds a position as Vice President of Global Tax Planning and Acquisitions for IHS Incorporated, but he has a very lengthy resume in the field of accounting and finance. He has 26 years of experience in the tax accounting field and has been a CPA for 23 years. He has worked as a federal tax enforcement agent, an advisor to multinational clients, especially in the technology industry. Has been a senior tax officer for several multinational companies. He currently works at IHS, a Fortune 500 company. He's been there for 6 years. He is responsible for developing and managing IHS's global tax strategies for 30 countries that it operates in, and he manages all acquisition tax due diligence and integration efforts. He came to that company from Tompkins, a British publicly traded company that was based in London, where he oversaw all international tax operations. He worked at Deloitte, one of the 4 largest CPA companies in the world. He was an international tax service practitioner in Denver, and he was with the IRS, where he was an international specialist for large company audits for 13 years. So I believe that what he says will have teeth to it, and it'll be worth our listening very closely. In fact, I've used up half his time just reading his resume. But I think what's most important to us, along with that, is the fact that he has been a servant of God for a long time. He has served as a deacon here. I was surprised at this, for 20 years. He is currently our deacon over financial systems. He, as I said before, is a great friend to preachers and is very supportive of training men to preach. And he and his wife have been very involved in the school so many times in ways you can't see throughout the year. So we're very glad to have him here. I don't want to take up any more of his time except to bow briefly for a word of prayer as we begin. Father, we're so thankful that we have this opportunity to listen to our brother Michael as he presents to us some very needed information for us in the realm of finance. And we pray that you'll help us always to be good stewards, to always seek to improve, to be good managers of what resources you give us, and to understand how to relate to this nation and our world, and how to be good law-abiding citizens. We pray that you will bless him as he leads us in our thinking this morning, and we're just so grateful that he can be with us today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks, Neal. Well, that wasn't depressing to hear. 26 years in tax.
Sounded to me like you just didn't hold the job.
Well, that's the other way to look at it. I heard your memory reading was in Romans, and Romans always reminds me of one of the tax jokes I learned early on in my career. In chapter 6, at the end of the verse, at the end of the chapter says, "And the wages of sin are death." And you think about it from a tax viewpoint, I look at it and say, well, after you take out taxes, it's just a tired gun. You can quote me about it. So I thought, what should I talk to you guys about? I have done in my IRS days a lot of individual tax, a lot of international tax work, so I know there's some issues that you have when you work overseas versus here. And what would be key areas for you to know? I don't want to teach you today to become tax experts, tax preparers. Matter of fact, everybody raise their hand who's actually done their tax return this year.
Oh, I've done it in the past.
2 guys, ready to go? Me too. By yourself?
No, Gretchen did it.
Well, you West Carolina, we may have the wrong group here. Typically, it's the wives that handle the finance and tax, but take good notes. Hopefully we'll be able to express. But, this is a special year for the U.S. I don't know if anybody celebrated on February 3rd with me, the 100th anniversary of our tax code. It's been 100 years, February 3rd.
Way to be party.
You still have a second opportunity, though. October 3rd is the day the Revenue Act was actually issued that year. So if you actually had any wages earned before October 3rd, 1913, you paid no tax. Unfortunately, from there forward, that's part of our lives. And I always remember sitting in Denny's classes, and he says it's the words, right? It's the words when you study. So you look at the Constitution. I know you guys carry around one of these with you. There you go. How does the government have authority to tax us, right? 1913, when did our country start? Wes?
1776.
Very good. Yeah, very good. It says in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, that the Congress shall have the power. And anytime you see something that starts off with the Congress shall have the power, be nervous. That means they're taking rights away, right? So the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes. Well, we didn't have an income tax for quite a while, since 1776 or 87, since the Constitution. It wasn't until this little thing called the 16th Amendment, 30 short words, came in. It was actually passed by the Congress in 1909, and then it took almost, 4 years for the states to pass it as an amendment. And it says these words: the Congress shall have the power, those words again, to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among several states and without regard to census or enumeration. The key words there, something to remember is the principle of taxation is from whatever source derived. So when you think about any kind of wealth or income or things you get, it's always taxable unless they say otherwise. So from whatever source derived. So it's a good principle to think about, because you'll be doing speaking activities, you'll be writing books, getting published. Members are going to give you contributions, gifts, physical gifts, monies. You're going to be a student here. You're a student here at the school. You're getting support fees, support money. The first words are from whatever source derived. It's taxable. So unless there's a prescribed code section that says it's not taxable, it's taxable. Now, I was talking to our friend up there from the Caymans. This obviously applies to those that are citizens, right, of the U.S. But it also applies to those residents. Now, how do you become a resident and subject to our taxes? You just got to be here 183 days. Once you're in the U.S. for 183 days, you get to join the tax system. All its wonderful benefits. Well, let me just go for the topics I'm going to cover. I don't see you have a whiteboard down here. High tech now. Sorry. Here's what I'm going to cover. If you think of something else you want to talk about or questions, raise your hand, ask your questions. I mean, this is for you guys. I consider talking about taxes for 20 years.
Just give me again what you said. You use a statement to describe what is taxable.
Yes.
What was the phrase that you used?
From whatever source derived, which is words that mean everything that you get that adds to your wealth, monies, any kind of like tangible things is taxable. It doesn't have to be just cash or check, unless otherwise exempted. And there's some big ones that are definitely key for ministers.
Mike, is there a special meaning to 183?
183 is 1 day more than half a year, right? So the idea is, if you're in the States for more than half a year, you're resident now. To be a long-term resident means you have to average 121 days a year over a 3-year period. The code sections that describe what's a taxable resident for taxes are totally different than immigration. And what you get, like a visa to come to the States to study, is totally different than the tax rules. You're going to get a visa to be here for 3 to 5 years, to go to school, maybe get employment. You get a special visa for that. But the tax rules are different. The tax code I just mentioned that started in 1913 has an entirely different section of the federal laws. There's a section just for tax rules, and there's a section for immigration rules and other rules. And the definitions they use don't cross over. So when they say something that is resident for tax doesn't mean you're resident for immigration status purposes. So you can be in the States illegally without proper permission or visas, then you're still subject to tax. Some of the biggest criminals in our history were put down because of tax fraud, not murder, theft, physical crimes, because they could catch them on the tax. If you want, you can ask me some stories. I can tell you, 13 years in the government, chased a lot of tax cheats. It all comes down to one core issue usually with these folks: greed. They'll make arguments, technical or otherwise. Dealt with all the protesters. There's a bunch of protesters in Colorado, folks that you may hear, at your congregations or when you're traveling. They'll give you ideas on why you don't have to pay an income tax. Roundly, been beat down in the courts year after year after year. You're just wasting time and money going down that path. Okay, so things I'm going to talk about: parsonage allowance. That's a key one. Expense accounts. What does that mean to a member? Self-employment taxes. Huge. Exemption form for self-employment taxes. Estimated tax payments. What does that mean to you? Church staff and secretaries. Your wives will likely take jobs or do things for the churches you work at, the congregations. What does it mean to them from an income tax standpoint? It's different than for you. Other monies you may make. Weddings, funerals, gifts from the elders and the members. Other activities you may do. Speaking fees, publishing books. What do you do with that income? Tax credits. What kind of tax credits are there? Things that help offset your tax payments. Tax records. How important are they? How long do you keep it? And then tax help. Where do you go? There's online sources now. Everything's online. There's professionals of different varieties, different certifications, different skill sets. There's members that you'll meet that have some tax experience. You can there's a whole continuum of help you can get. There's actually free tax services for certain folks. That, as an IRS agent, you used to go out there and work on Saturdays and help people do their tax returns, no charge. But just realize who's helping you, how much, what their bias is. The tax rules are not clear and crystal. They're somewhat muddy at times, and you can take positions one way or the other. So I thought the best way to start as an example. Let's hope preacher taxation. Why is it different? How many have had a job before they came here? Regular job, working for some company. You got a W-2, right? They took out some monies out of your paycheck. What's that little line? FICA. I remember I taught a high school class when I was at the IRS to help the sort of struggling students. They realize they're going to be employed pretty soon. They're looking to finish high school. And so we're trying to help them into the workforce. And then one student, he raised his hand. I just got a job 2 weeks ago. I got my first paycheck, and I got one question for you.
Who's FICA?
Who's FICA, and why they got my money? Right? Does anybody know what FICA is?
Federal income something.
It's insurance, right? It's federal insurance. You're helping pay for your retirement plan, right? Supposedly it'll be there.
Yeah.
But that's what that is, right? As a minister, you're a little different. You're both an employee and you're self-employed simultaneously. The tax code looks at you guys uniquely. As an employee of a company, as a corporate officer, you withhold FICA taxes, you pay your 7.65%, which covers Medicare as well. Up to a certain amount of income, the company matches that and pays exactly what you pay this year. And then they withhold some income taxes. You pay some tax on your W-2 income, right? As a minister, I do this for the Bear Valley. I've done it for years. You may get a W-2 from the church, but they don't take FICA taxes out of your pay. And we don't take income taxes out of your pay. You just get a W-2 that says, this is how much we paid you. And you're thinking, well, that makes sense, right? Do I not have to pay that? I don't have to pay those FICA taxes? I'm different than an employee somehow? Unfortunately, you have to pay self-employment taxes, which are the other side of federal insurance, Social Security system, for self-employed people. So you're both self-employed from that side of the tax code, self-employment taxes. And from a regular income tax standpoint, you're an employee. Key distinction. It'll mean big differences on your deductions, how you deduct your expenses. You're going to buy computers, books, kind of things, those are deductible expenses. As an employee, much different than as a self-employed person. So here's the example. I have a whiteboard to write it down, so here you go. Regular employee, let's compare a minister to a regular employee, both making $50,000 a year. $30 an hour, right? An employee faces, first thing he's going to see on his paycheck is the FICA taxes, right? Medicare. So you know, round numbers here. Take 50,000, subtract 3,800 bucks. Then subtract for your income taxes. Now in the state of Colorado, we have an income tax. Not every state does. Depends on what state you're in. State of Colorado, let's assume it's a 5% tax. Tax rates for states vary from 3 to 10. Some are 0. Some states don't have income tax. So this regular employee, 50,000 paycheck, 3,800 bucks for FICA. Subtract out 2,000 for federal tax, income tax.
Federal or state?
Federal. Okay. Just 2,000 for federal, and that's net. That's net of some credits and deductions, and we'll get to that. That's your net federal tax payment. And 1,000 for the state. You're going to pay 1,000 to the state. So you've got 3,200 of income taxes now. You pay 3,800 of FICA taxes, or your Social Security taxes, payroll taxes. So you paid $7,000 in taxes. What do you think your tax rate is? 14%, right? All the politics of the last election season, they always talk about what's your effective tax rate. You know, Mr. Romney and others. Well, as a $50,000 employee, your income tax rate is only 6.4%. They don't count federal taxes in the analysis. But overall, you're out $7,000. Your take-home pay is what? $43,000 bucks, right? Now you're a minister. You're making $50,000. I give you a W-2 that says $50,000 on it, nothing else on there. You go down and sit down to your tax return with your wife, and you realize you owe this thing called SECA, S-E-C-A, self-employment. That's the FICA equivalent for self-employed people. As a minister, you're self-employed, so you're going to owe $7,500 for self-employment taxes. You're wondering, why is it so much more than the employee? I only had $3,800. You pay both sides. Now, don't lose this. When your employer takes it out of your and pays $3,800 for you, and you takes $3,800 of your paycheck, that $3,800 was really your money. They just took it ahead of time. So now you're out $7,500 bucks. So $50,000 minus $7,500 for self-employment taxes. Federal tax, it's a little different. You're only out $1,500. State tax, same, $1,000. So $2,500 of income taxes, plus $7,500 of self-employment taxes. How much you lose? 10 grand. So you made $40,000 net cash, compared to corporate employee made $43,000. So you're $3,000 short. So, not a good answer, right? So let's go to the first topic I talked about. What's the equalizers? What are the things you can do in this tax code to equalize? The biggest one is parsonage allowance. Sounds like a weird term. We don't use that word much anymore, parsonage. What do you think of parsonage is, just in its normal definition? What does that sound like to you?
Preacher's house.
A preacher's house. We have one right over here, right? This building just south of us is our parsonage, right? One of the former ministers here actually lived in it. One of the elders lived in it. That's free housing. Guess what? There's a code section that says that's tax-free. You know, benefit. You got, free housing. Instead of having to pay rent or own your own house, it's free housing. So the code is allowed for those that don't have a real parsonage, an actual house provided, an equivalent to say you can elect annually and document with church records an election or an allowance to say, I want to say X amount of my $50,000 is a parsonage allowance. This has changed over the last decade, how you compute this amount, mostly because of abuse. Rules change because people abuse things. It used to be you could just pick an amount. You could be $10,000, $20,000, $40,000, someone $50,000. Exclude all their income. They said it's all parsonage allowance. No limitation. Well, then if that's the case, how much income tax are you going to pay? minister example, we had $2,500. You don't pay the $2,500. You have no taxable income, right? Still pay self-employment tax. Parsonage allowance does not cover self-employment taxes. So that $7,500, you still pay. Doesn't matter how much your parsonage allowance is. But for income tax, you can exempt income. Great idea. Exempt income, that's hard to get, guys. There's not many code sections where you can exempt income. They changed the rules because people were abusing this, right? They were making 95, 100% of their income tax free. So they put a couple limitations on it. The first one was, okay, let's limit to your actual expenses. You know, how much do you really pay for your housing? Now, housing and the costs that go into this calculation are more than just your interest and taxes on your mortgage, more than your rent payment of your renting. It's beyond that. It's buying furniture. It's putting, refrigerators and microwaves, utility costs. All that gets calculated into what it costs to have a house, right? They said, okay, well, maybe that's not so bad. Instead of $50,000, $40,000, maybe have a $30,000. I have a nice, really big house, buy a lot of furniture, a lot of remodel work. A couple years ago, from California, Swagger, you may have heard of the name, started abusing that rule, right? After he paid off his mortgages on his multi-million-dollar estates, he was still estimating what the rent would have been if he still had, to pay rent or to pay interest and taxes. So he still was taking a large allowance. So the government said, and they almost totally eliminated this code section in 2007. You would have lost it in that. But they came back to Congress and said, no, we need to provide something. Because they see the difference, the example we just went through, right? 40,000 versus 43. So they limited the allowance, this exclusion, to the fair rental value. How much would the fair rental value be in your place? So not just your actual cost, but if we had to rent your place with furniture, fully, furnished house, what would that be? So that's the limitation. Your election is one number, the actual expense, and then the fair rental. The lower of those three numbers is your exclusion. Biggest thing to remember to do, and don't forget this every year, wherever you go, is make the election with the church officer of the highest amount you think you're going to get. You can't go any higher. If you set your election at 10,000 and you spend 20, guess what? You only get 10. So always make your election the highest. Aim to hit it. If you don't hit it, fine. You bring it down to your actual cost and your rent value. And that's what you take as your exclusion. See, too many people lose that opportunity. And I'll give you an example of how it makes a difference. Let's go back to our minister making $50,000. We'll change one thing. Before we calculate how much income tax, let's subtract $20,000. Let's say the parsonage allowance is $20,000. $1,667 a month to cover his cost of this house. Sounds amazing. Most large metropolitan cities you can get there. His income tax goes from $1,500 for federal to $0. The state income tax goes from $1,200 to $200. Right, so now you're down to $200 instead of $2,500. Your $7,500 self-employment tax is the same, no change. Your total taxes are now $7,700, roughly 15% of your $50,000. Then your take-home is $42,300. What was our take-home for an employee? 43. So you're about equivalent to regular employment. That's the parsonage allowance. That's the equivalent.
You said you want to make your election high. How do you do this?
Well, you estimate. So there's a form that most churches will use that sort of specifies, and it has all the language on it that you need to say. And it goes into church records, and that's the requirement of the law. And you just estimate what I'm going to have for utilities, mortgage and interest if you own a house, renting a house, repairs, equipment, buying equipment or things for the house, that kind of thing. You just go through this list and estimate that. Go ahead.
Is it possible for us to get a blank copy of the one
Sure.
that you use here? Because the one you use here is better than I've seen
Really?
elsewhere.
Yeah.
It's more thorough.
Okay.
And it's called, the title of it was?
Parsonage allowance.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's code section 107, in case you're interested.
Michael, are you gonna deal with what happens if you don't hit the number, if you're below that?
Yeah, so the idea is this, there's three numbers you care about. What's on your election form, you wanna make it the highest. What your actual costs are, so when you get to the end of the year, how much did I really spend on those categories? And then your estimated fair rental value. And you calculate those three numbers, and the smallest of those three is your actual exclusion. So if you set your allowance at 30, and your actual expenses were 20, and your fair rental value was 30, what number are you gonna exclude? 20. So, but if you put your election at 10, you're gonna get 10. So don't make that mistake. And this is the equalizer, guys. I mean, this is not, and I've got a quote, because I know some people think about taxes and say, I don't want to avoid paying taxes, and it feels like it's unpatriotic. I would ask you, when you go to buy, a TV, a laptop, you're looking for the best deal? You want to just pay whatever amounts? Right, it's money out of your pocket. And every dollar you keep is more you can do with your dollar, for your family, for your church, for people in need. Right, more money in your pocket, the more you can do. Right? There's a famous quote that in the tax world, and Supreme Court justices refer to it all the time. A judge called Judge Learned Hand, and he says this back in 1872. And you wonder, 1872, that's before we had the income tax, right? Well, we had this thing called the Civil War. We had an income tax for a little bit. So there was some cases for a temporary tax. How often do you see that? It was in for 3 and out. Never. He says, anyone may arrange his affairs so that his taxes shall be as low as possible. He is not bound to choose the pattern which best pays the treasury. There is not even a patriotic duty to increase one's taxes. Over and over again, the courts have said that there is nothing sinister in so arranging affairs as to keep taxes as low as possible. Everyone does it, rich and poor alike, and all do right, for nobody owes public duty to pay more than the law demands. Right? It's compliance with the rules. This parsonage allowance is one of the laws in our tax code. It's allowed. There's prescriptions, there's regulations on how you do it, but it's allowed. Right? Nothing to feel bad about taking this allowance.
And there's a distinction between playing by the rules that are there for your benefit and looking for loopholes.
That is right. There's abuse.
I think that's where people get a little bit confused.
Tax evasion and tax avoidance. Tax avoidance is what's allowed, what's within the law. Tax evasion is beyond the law. My 13 years of the government, I saw both. Folks working beyond the law and those working within the law. And as within the law, Congress wrote it for a reason. They had a purpose in mind. There was an intent. They allow these things, these deductions, these credits, these allowances, these exclusions for a reason. They were passed by our Congress, right? So they're in the law. It's not something that you're abusing to use it. So my goal, we covered the first one because it's the biggest one, but my goal for you guys, obviously, is not to make you tax preparers. You're going to get help somehow, paid for or otherwise. It's my vocation. I don't mean it to make it your vocation. At best, an avocation. Or for your wives, I should say. My focus would be you need to spend as little time on this as possible. Taxes and finances are not the key thing that you're here for. There's more weightier matters that you have to deal with. And frankly, last night I saw 2 of your former classmates do some amazing things. There's some things you'll do in the church. You'll be the first call that when tragedy happens, it's going to come your way. You don't need to be worried about how do I put out my parsonage allowance on the tax form. Okay? But it is a cost. And the less cost you have, what does that mean? The more money you can do other things with. Churches, a lot of congregations don't have a lot of cash. Right? So the monies they can pay you may not be as much as it should be, honestly. In my view, we underpay our preachers all the time.
So Michael, if I understand this right now, these guys are probably a lot sharper than I am about this stuff, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to lower the overall bottom gross line so that things even out for you. And that's how you're doing it with the parsonage allowance.
That's the one visual you have.
You're lowering the big number to start with.
It is a cost.
so that you're taxed less
Yeah.
on your big money, if that makes sense to you guys.
Now, there is a difference, and we can talk about it now if you want later. I mean, if you're a U.S. citizen or resident of the U.S. versus not. Like I said, if you're here in the U.S. for more than 103 days, you're subject to these rules. However, you think if you're outside the U.S., you're outside the U.S. tax rules? Anybody think that?
Only if you're in the military and you're in Kuwait. That'll be tax free.
There's some exclusions, but guess what? You're still subject to U.S. tax. Even in your base, Frankfurt, in Afghanistan. If you're a citizen and you go anywhere in the world, you go to Cambodia, and you work there for a while, you're still subject to U.S. tax. It's one of the unique tax systems in the world that does this. Most other countries, and I deal with, like Neal said, 30 countries for our company. Most countries don't do that. They just tax people on the income they make in their country. U.S. is unique in this way. If you're a citizen, you're taxed regardless of where you live, where you work, where you get your monies. So if you get support from somebody outside the U.S., it's still taxable.
Like Gerard Depardieu left France and went to Belgium, and a lot of the wealthiest people in France are doing that to evade paying taxes
And
in
you know why
France.
they don't have to give up their citizenship?
Mm-mm.
It's residence-based taxation. Most European countries are residence-based tax. UK is this way. And so folks with money play a lot of games around where they reside. Right? Even in the states are resident-based taxation. The federal is not, but the states are. So you can choose to live in a certain state that has lower tax. Folks, a lot of celebrities don't live in California. They're not resident there. They have houses there. They work there. But they do. They count their days. And once they hit their limit, they're out of California for the rest of the year. To avoid, because California is what? 10% taxes. Very high tax for state income tax. Any questions on the example or harshness?
So Mike, on the parsonage, the whole idea of the parsonage is more of an advantage than a disadvantage?
Huge advantage. It is a key advantage for a minister. And I call it the equal. I mean, you're trying to equalize your position just to get, like Wes was saying, get your cost equal, at least to a regular employee, right?
$3,000.
That's a lot of money. You need a lot of $3,000. So some take-home things for you. Think about this. When my kids graduated from college, Kayla and got married, and I sat down with them, I said, here's some things to think about when you get a job. How much of my taxes should I expect out of my paycheck? What are those numbers? Regular couple, no kids. I always tell them, think 10% for federal. If you're not withholding 10% income tax from your paycheck, you're under withholding. 5% for a state, for an average state. But that doesn't even include their FICA taxes, right? That's coming out on top. So your total tax out of pocket is 15 plus, let's say 8 around, 23%. So if you get a job for $50,000, realize 23% off the top gone. So when you do your budgets and think about things you can spend on, remember that. Now as a minister, it's different. Now, if you're doing the minister with the parsonage allowance, how much federal income tax should you be paying? Zero. Right? State, very little. Pay it when the return is filed. No reason to make estimates. What do you need to make estimated tax payments for, or withholdings, or put money in the bank for? SECA. Right? $7,500. Make sure you put that aside. Don't pay that in time. You're going to annualize it.
I used to do that. I used to be self-employed, so I used to do that.
Yeah, make your estimate. Big deal. Yeah, don't mess it up. Don't forget
No,
about it.
I paid 18%, that way I had more at the end of the
Yeah.
year.
So what's the number you should think in your head as a minister? How much tax am I thinking about? It's the SECA tax. What's that rate? 15.3. Just think 15%. They're paying you $50,000, 15% of that's going for taxes. Now there are deductions that can reduce that. Like any self-employed individual, right? You have expenses, right? That can help reduce every dollar you pay for self-employed tax. It's the net you pay on, not the gross, the net. So if you have $1,000 of expenses, like business expenses, laptops,
You get travels.
certain travel, every $1,000 saves you $150. Keep your records, save your money. $150 for every $1,000 of expense that you can document. So those are the financial rules of thumb that I like to get your kids today. Something to think about when you start doing budgets, right? How much should I lose out of my paycheck? Because you think, I got $50,000, I got a lot to spend. You don't have $50,000. Those athletes, when they get those $10 million contracts, they don't get $10 million. They get half. At the highest rate, you lose half. Federal state. Okay.
Have $5 million still a lot of money. I hate to have to live on $5 million. That'd just be pathetic.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can do it. See you Doritos. Guess I'll have to get the cheap bacon.
All right, so let's go. Expense accounts, next item I cover. Expense accounts. What is that? What do you think an expense account is? What does it sound like to you? Sounds like some sort of corporate hoity-toity has, right? So we can
Sounds like
go on
an
lunches and
account
take his executives out and golf trips,
I'm gonna get in trouble.
right? There's another key thing for ministers, guys, because you're both an employee and self-employed. As an employee, those kind of expenses are only deductible on what they call an itemized schedule, Schedule A. Well, guess what? Everybody gets a standard amount. They call it standard deduction. For married, the example I had, I should have said this, was a married couple, one child in that calculation. So for a married couple, you get $12,000 basically, of given deductions, regardless if you have contributions, mortgage interest, taxes. The government just said, you know what, let's not fiddle with everybody. Let's just put a number out there, so unless you have more, you don't have to keep records. Employee expenses are in that category, of that $12,000. So unless your contributions, your mortgage interest, your taxes, real estate taxes, and your employee expenses are more than $12,000, it's not going to matter. Not going to change your return one bit. However, it does reduce your self-employment tax. Every $1.15, $1,000, $150. Those kind of qualified business expenses. Now, it sounds weird to say business when you're talking about ministers, right? But it's the same kind of concept. The law is still similar for an executive, an employee, for a company as a minister. What's a business expense? It's what's related to your activity, to your job, to your assignments, to your duties. What kind of things do you need to buy to do your work? You cannot deduct your clothes. You're not a fireman. You don't have to have special clothing. Don't get to do that. Right? A lot of people try. You may not only wear a tie for church services. Nobody else wears them. I hardly ever see guys with ties. This is pretty cool. Nobody corporate world wears ties anymore. But that's not deductible, right? But there are things that are, right? If you keep your records. So then what's this expense account, Michael? Why do I care about expense accounts? I get my deduction for self-employment tax. Well, from an income tax standpoint, if you are paying income taxes, the way to say you get some benefit out of those expenses is to have the church set up an expense account. So you set up for the year and say, I'm going to spend $2,500 out of my own money to cover these kind of costs. You work it out with the church treasurer, and you turn in your receipt statement. He reimburses you for those expenses. That's taken away from your tax bill. That's not tax. Right? So now you're getting a deduction that you weren't otherwise getting. So if you had $50,000, you're taking $2,500 and said, I want to take that as an expense account. That's not taxable. If you follow the rules and turn in your receipts. Actual. You can't estimate this. You can't just say, hey, give me $100 a month. $2,400. I have that, at least that much in expense. I know. Somewhere. I have to keep the records out and prove it to you. Well, you gotta have to prove it. It has to be actual. It's called an accountable plan. It's a pretty key arrangement to have. Now, it has to be set up with your church so that whoever run the finances, your treasurer, whatever, would have to make sure they operate these things. But it's another benefit, like the parsonage loans, right? You get some income tax benefit from your expenses, because otherwise you're not going to get much if any income tax benefit. Still good.
Is this also called the reimbursable expense account?
Same thing, reimbursable expense account. The technical term is accountable plan. And the deal is, you can deduct it. Let's say if you put on your tax return for deduct it, and you had more expenses. Let's see your contributions, everything else, put you over $12,000. You're married, one kid. Yeah, you'll get the benefit. But it's just who do you want to give the records to? The IRS? And you can take it as a deduction. You give it to your church treasurer. It's excluded from your income. And you don't have to worry about limitations. Oh, there is that one thing. 2% of every dollar you make in income is subtract from that amount. Because they don't want too many people claiming this. They want to keep this down to those that spend serious amounts of war business expenses. You don't want to worry about guys paying $500, $700 union dues, those kind of things. So there's limitations. Actually, you're going to lose out now if you try to deduct it. You're going to lose 2% of your income as an amount they're going to say is a floor before you get any benefit at all. Expense accounts, another key thing. We didn't have any. Go ahead.
So you said you're going to take, like you said, $2,500 of your own money
$50,000.
and give it to the church to set up an expense account, and then you're basically reimbursing yourself, right?
Exactly right. It sounds weird, I know, but you're just carving up your pay and saying, okay, my $50,000 pay, first, I want $20,000 parsonage allowance. So when you do your church records, $20,000 is paid as a parsonage, $30,000 left, right? Of that $30,000, I want to say $2,500 of that is in my expense, reimbursable expense account. The rest of it, pay me in cash as wages. And put it on my W-2, the tax form.
Oh, I see, okay.
But the 25, here's the catch on the 2,500. What if you had thought you were going to spend 2,500 and get some new laptop this year? Oops, I didn't do it. I go back to the treasurer and I say, I like my $2,500 though. You don't get it. You lose it.
You gotta spend it.
You don't get it next year, you spend it next year. So whatever you elect, you better spend it. This is opposite of the parsonage allowance election. You make that high and you try to hit it, then you don't high. Expense account, if you hit it high, make it high, you don't hit it, you'll lose the money. The church cannot give it to you. If they do, any expense account plan they run is completely busted, all taxable to everybody, not just you.
So is this because it's going through the church, and then the church is a 501c3?
C3. Very good, another code section. That's their exempt status, yeah. And so they're basically saying, as an agent of the government, the church, this plan, is acting like the government taking these records, following the rules, acting as an agent of the IRS. If I don't, if I'm the church treasurer here and you don't give me the expense reimbursement documents, I can't cut you a check.
But how much,
Be nice to your church treasurers. They cut your paychecks.
how much will this actually really save you though over the taxes? So you put it aside, it's not taxable, but you don't spend it. Well, how, even if you do, how much does it really save you in the end?
Let's say your parsonage allowance doesn't wipe out your federal income tax, in our example. Let's say you don't have a parsonage allowance of $20,000. Let's say it's 10. So you have some federal income tax. Number to put in your head is 15%, almost like the self-employment tax rate. 10% is federal, 5% state. 15%, 15 cents in every dollar of this expense account you set up is saving you 15 cents for every dollar. $1,000, $150, $2,000, $300. Right? So that's the savings. Now, if you're not paying federal income tax because your parsonage allowance is large enough, it doesn't matter.
Can you give us some examples of things that belong in
Employee business
an
expense?
accountable plan?
Accountable plan? It wouldn't necessarily be travel, but you can include travel. Hosting people at your house. Members, visiting preachers, extension school directors, the cost of providing that meal.
Do you have a list of this kind of stuff?
There's actually a publication, I was going to get at the end, there's publications that the IRS puts out. I realize this is coming from the IRS, so they're going to be conservative in what they say, but accurate at times. But they'll give you a list of what are qualified expenses, typical things you can get. Your laptops, software for your work, anything that's connected to your responsibilities and your assignments.
Books.
Books for sure. Well,
So,
no.
going from what Pratt was saying, it's a little bit like those medical deals in a company where you
Healthcare plans, yeah.
the healthcare plans where they'll say you can save money if you'll estimate, how much you might spend on, say, pharmacy type stuff.
Out-of-pocket costs.
Out of pocket costs. So if it's like $2,000, but it's a little bit of a roll of the dice
Right.
Because if you don't spend that 2,000,
Yeah.
and you never get that back, and so that automatically starts, that's the loss part of it.
Yeah, yeah.
So you have to spend up to it, so you almost feel forced to spend it, so,
So that's what happens in December every year. What do you always see?
yeah, we
Ads, go get new
buying
glasses.
stuff, yeah.
Go get something, something quick. Spend your money before you lose it. Right? Get new pair of glasses. Yeah, so that's the risk of expense accounts. So be conservative on this, but there's still some savings there. Right?
Could you put, like, you're going to a seminar and the entry fee is like $50?
Yeah.
If the church doesn't have a separate, like an education fund or something.
Exactly. Some churches will set up additional monies for, their ministers, other staff people to go do things, right? Go to seminars, go to travel. That's reimbursed by your employer, not taxable to you, right? You still may have to give receipts to your employer, to the church, for that. But this is talking about an expense account, so you're carving off what they would otherwise pay. But Wes is correct. If you don't spend it, you lose it. And you can't carry it over to next year. And you have to turn them in timely. You can't wait 6 months and turn in your numbers. Right?
Everything has to be turned in within that calendar year.
Within probably at least within a quarter. Like to have it within a couple months of the actual expense happening. If you wait to the end of the year, you're pushing the rules. And there's a timely requirement in the code. Oh, and Neal did ask me to bring a presentation of PowerPoint or some material, so I thought I did bring some. I always forgot. A little something for everybody.
Just figure that out. Tell me all about it, all right?
It matches your shirt.
I'm sad to say, this represents one copy of the U.S. tax laws. Just one copy.
Yeah. And you wonder why we glaze over it.
26 years I've been doing this. My first day with the IRS, I remember going to my boss and saying, do I have to memorize all this? You guys come to class and you have to memorize? A few more words here, written by men as well. Not inspired. The one key thing, and this is the geekiness side of the tax code. They break the tax code up into chapters and parts. Like in the Bible, you have books, chapters, verses, right? Well, in the tax code, it goes title, chapter, part, subparts, subchapters, and then sections. Sections are like verses. Same story. But they've done a cool thing in the tax code is they enumerated every section, every verse, numerically from the beginning to the end. So regardless of which chapter it's in, what part it's in, what part of the title. So most of us think in sections now. I know it's different for, thinking about your Bibles and how they're organized. But they're sections. So, and the sections mean things. They're organized in certain ways. One of the classes I took at law school at the U was, you guys spent the first 2 hours just talking about the index to the tax code. I'm thinking, 2 hours on the index? But there's a rhyme and reason for the index, and why things are organized a certain way. And so after so many years, you realize when you're in the 300s sections, you're talking about companies. You're in the 800s, you're talking about foreign residents. You're in the 900s, you're talking about U.S. people, U.S. There's an organization. Hundreds. Those are key sections. Anything in the hundreds. That's the income exclusion. Parsonage, 107. Healthcare at your business, 125. Anything that starts with a 1, it's usually a good one. Income, 61. That's whatever source derived. That's where it all starts. You don't have to take this and study this. Again, my goal is not to make you guys tax practitioners. That's my vocation. Good or bad. Self-employment taxes.
Oh, you're going to tell us for the expense account, you said there's a place where you can go to find out what's included.
Pub 17, Publication 17, IRS website, some key publications to look at if you want to do some reading.
What's the website, Mike?
IRS.gov. All your government websites are gov. Don't type in something else, you may be surprised.
Okay, so look for expense.
Publication 17. And then we'll give you even a more specific publication that deals with travel expenses. When you travel, there's different rules around that. What kind of expenses you get when you travel? Are you traveling in the day? Are you traveling overnight? Are you going to Parker? Are you going to Lyman and back? And you can take transportation costs. That's my cost to move my vehicle there and back. 55.5 cents a mile, I think it's this week. Or your actual cost, depends on how you want to do it. If you're traveling away from home overnight, motel, and meals, and incidentals, laundering your clothes if you're traveling, getting your clothes laundered, your hotel cost, your actual hotel cost, meals. Now you can keep actual meals, or you can use an estimate. They have a thing called a per diem. Depends on what city you're in. They actually have one for every city. It's different. Roughly it's $34 a day. And you don't have to keep records for that. Just that you're away and where you were.
I don't know if you can answer this, or maybe Neal, but is $2,500 for an expense account a year, is that a pretty safe amount?
Very
Is
safe.
that higher or low?
Depends on what you're buying there. What are you going to get? Do you already have a laptop? You just find a few books? Do you have a few other business-related costs? You know, you sort of have to think about what you're going to be doing that year.
And you can set that at the beginning of every year.
Has to be at the beginning. Can't change it. Can't play with it and say in June I want it higher, I want it lower. You set it, it's fixed. Trust me, they've asked me. They want to change it. Commercialist allowance, once you set it, it's fixed. You can't redo it twice a year and say, hey, I need it higher. I might actually get to finish my basement this year.
Michael,
Yeah.
that was not something that was offered to me. I didn't even know it till I got here. By the time I got here, my other deductions were such that it wasn't worth it for me.
Yeah.
But it depends on where you are in your personal family life, right? It depends on what kind of deductions you have otherwise.
Yeah.
So it hasn't been worth the headache for me, but it will be again at some point.
Yeah, think about if you're renting a house now and you're looking to buy a house. You're going to have major costs to get into a new house, right? Your down payment. You're going to probably have to put window coverings up. The wife will want that, trust me. Furniture, fixtures, right? So you're going to have a lot of expenses in a year. So make sure in that year you set your number appropriately. But if you're just renting, you're not buying a lot of stuff that year, you know, you're not going to get much. You're not going to. You can set it high, but you're not going to get much. Expense account though, be very critical on what you think you're going to spend or really do. I've seen some sad stories here where folks have set it and they've lost $1,000. It's a lot of money. I just tell them we can't do it. We can't undo it. Because like I said, if you undo one person, you need to cut them a favor. It puts at risk everybody's plan. Right, the entire arrangement.
Would that person go too high, or
Too high.
could they just not? Okay. Like you can't find stuff to spend money on. I can help you.
Well, I think they got past the end of the year and they realized they had to spend it. And so once you're in January, you can't, there's no time machines. You can't go back. You can make an IRA deduction after the year, but you can't make an employee expense after the year. So other exclusions, gifts. Gifts are not taxable. But gifts as an employee are taxable. So your minister in a congregation and the elders, so some members decided to give you an extra $2,000 this year. And the generosity of their heart is taxable. You're an employee from an income tax standpoint. Employees cannot get tax-free gifts from their employer.
Christmas bonuses, all that stuff.
That's right. So how many people watch the World Series and you see, or McGuire hit his whatever home run, they set the record, and then the next one, that was worth a little bit of money, that ball. Right? Is that taxable? What do you think?
I'd be a third at least.
Completely subject.
It's an award. Except they wrote a ruling. The commissioner, public relations at all, to exempt it. But case law supported that it's taxable. It doesn't value. You read something of value. You haven't turned it to cash yet, but tax code doesn't rely on the cash. It says once you get something of value, it's taxable. You find $100 on the street, put it in your pocket, it's taxable income.
Wow.
I just leave that there.
I give you $100, it's not taxable. You pick it up and hand it to somebody, not taxable to that guy, taxable to you. There's nothing in here that says it's fair, sensible.
There's no tax on the gospel in there anywhere, right? We're good.
In the Constitution, it says they have the power to lay this tax for what purpose? To pay the debts of the government, common defense, and general welfare. I think they've expanded beyond that, just a little bit. Right? But still, that's what we live with.
Pay for all the senators' bonuses.
Yeah. Like your sale of your house. Another 100 code section, 121, not taxable, up to a certain amount, tax-free, right? You buy and sell your homes, you fix it up yourself and sell it. Married couple up to $500,000, you don't pay taxes. Pretty good. People do that all the time, just like parsonage allowance, they're taking advantage of the code, taking the rules as given. Travel costs, I think we covered that, unless you guys want to go through that some more. I mean, you got to keep records. Actual hotel, you got to keep your receipts. Meals you can estimate or do your actuals. For you. Not for your spouse, not for your kids. Unless they're there working as well. And they're required to be there, not just conveniently there. I dealt with this with a couple of the missionaries here over the years. Wilcox's daughter, Warren's daughter, in Australia, a couple of years. She got monies to help pay her living expenses. What do you think that is? That's a general rule. Taxable? She's a U.S. citizen in Australia. They're just giving her money to pay for her living costs.
You said any money.
Whatever source derived. Except, you can find an exception. So I found an old revenue rule. I talked about reimbursement of just living costs for missionaries. Excluded. It's not taxable. Almost treated like an expense. Something key to remember, right? Because wherever you travel, in the U.S., outside the U.S., you're probably going to get support funds, right? If you're not spending your own nickel. Is that taxable?
You haven't told us. Support money is taxable?
Where's it come from? Right?
From the church.
Yeah. As your employer, it's taxable. If it's a gift, not taxable. From an individual, somebody else.
So it has to be a gift straight to you though, right, Mike? It can't go through the church, because then it becomes they're getting a deduction of
Depends on how your relationship with the church. Are you an employee of the church? Then if you're a member of the church and they gather up monies to help you in need, you'll have members do this all the time. And you need to help out Bill. Bill has had a bad week, lost his job, needs some monies. We all pool our cash and give some money to the church. They all give me the cash, I write a check to Bill. That's a gift. He's not an employee of the church.
So that's not taxable for Bill.
No.
So if the preacher's working somewhere and the elders say we're going to give Neal $1,000 to go overseas,
that's taxable, unless it's for your expenses. You sort of do the expense account treatment.
You mean that estimated expense?
Additional, separate.
Oh, that's separate.
It's not expense account. This is sort of like we're reimbursing for travel.
so long as you hold, if you collect your receipts that show it as work-related,
Exactly.
you have that against the 1,000.
Because it's not coming out of your 50,000 paycheck, is it?
Mm-mm.
It's extra monies. And so the church can set up accounts or have monies aside to pay for your expenses in addition to your pay. That's not taxable, as long as you follow the rules and do the documentation. And that can be educational, seminars, whatever, related to your assignments and duties. I know it's sort of weird to think of yourself as an employee. I mean, that's not a real relationship, but that's how the tax code sees you.
So like now, as a student, I think it's under 3,000. I got a W-2 from Florence for
What?
under $3,000 for preaching over there.
Oh, yeah. So you're in school, and you're not an employee of this church, right? So the rules don't apply there. But let's say you go preach out, and they pay you. What are you doing? I know what you're doing. A tax code, what are you doing? What's that called?
Any source derived,
Yeah, that's self-employed income.
Is there a minimum that you have to make every year to even file a tax? Because I was told
Remember
it
the
was
principle,
$7,000.
the principle is every dollar from whatever source derives taxable.
Mhm.
The form that somebody fills out and mails to you, which doesn't say it's taxable or not, if it's less than on the form, still doesn't mean it's not taxable. $600. So if it's $500, they don't send you a form. But the $500, still taxable. Just because you didn't get a form,
Even though your standard deduction is going to be more than what you made, you still have to file it.
that's right, from an income tax.
That's what you're telling me. Yeah.
Income tax, when you include that as self-employment net income. Now, how'd you get there?
How did I get it?
Where you preached. How'd you get there? You
Oh,
walked.
truck.
You took a truck.
My truck.
So how many miles was it?
It's 200 miles from.
55 cents a mile. That's your expense. You can take your expense against that income.
Plus the maintenance on the vehicle too.
It's one or the other. It's either all your actual
Really?
cost or 55 cents a mile. 55 and a half
55
cents.
cents a mile. Is not bad.
The estimates, I always tell the guys it's easier to do that than try to keep all your records.
Right.
Because then you have to prorate. Because you don't use your car 100% for preaching, do you?
No.
You go to the grocery store.
Oh, yeah.
You come here once in a while.
Oh,
Yeah.
I
That's
make
not
you come
business
here
expense.
once in a while.
Yeah, so you have to prorate that.
Yeah.
So just take 55 and a half cents a mile, whatever the rate is every year they change it.
Well, I was
It's a lot
just,
easier, just
you know,
go through
'cause
miles. You know what I'm saying, I went to Lyman, I know how far Lyman is, that doesn't change much.
Right.
You can go about that.
You know,
Further each time.
Congregations will, when you go and you speak somewhere,
Yes.
they'll pay you,
Speaker fees.
more and more there, you'll get there and they'll give you the form to fill out. And then you'll get I forget, what's it called, I get it all the time.
W-9 is the form you fill out, 1099 is what you get.
I get a 1099 in the mail, you typically right after the first of the year. But I still have to keep up with it because not everybody does that.
So
So,
everybody's compliant. I mean, that's one of those things that it depends on who's in the finance function of your church.
they're not knowledgeable, they don't know about it. But you still, even if they don't send you a 1099, you still have to.
You realize if somebody come to your house to do some repair work, you have to give them a 1099 and you pay them more $600. So, you do that? I've never done it, right? So there's a requirement to report, but that doesn't mean it's taxable or not taxable. So you're out speaking now. You got a job. They want you to come to Dallas to speak at a seminar. They're going to give you $1,000 and pay for your hotel and pay for your airfare. Cost you $500 for a airfare and hotel. They pay direct, or they pay you and you pay them the hotel and the airfare. Of that $1,500, how much are you going to pay tax on? What do you think? Paid you $1,000 to speak, $500 to get there and back and stay in a hotel. If you give them receipts for your airfare and your hotel, they're only going to put $1,000, they should, on your 1099, and you'll pay income tax, self-employment tax on that. You can't deduct that $500 now against your self-employment tax because you sort of exclude that income. But $1,000, going to pay $150 self-employment tax. If you have any income tax, let's say state of Colorado, another $150 if you're not otherwise exempt from income tax. You cannot use your parsonage on that income.
Usually, now, I mean, almost always, when you go to the hotel, it's a direct bill to the church.
Yeah, they
They
cover it directly.
Your cards for incidentals,
Yeah.
and so it bypasses you completely, so that.
That's right, because they've got the expense record, right? They've got the hotel bill themselves. They've got that. They're just acting as an agent for the government to get the document to say it's deductible. But whatever speaker fees you do, whatever books you write and make money on, parsonage allowance isn't covering that. That's taxable income. Right? Self-employed is taxable income.
Well, if you lose money, you can take that off too.
You can lose money. There's no requirement of the code that says you must make a profit. They've tried. There's actually a code section I can give to you. Hobby loss rules, they call them. Where people sort of did this abuse again, right? So that people would set up the ranch and they'd have 2 or 3 cattle. Well, really it was their estate in Vail that they vacationed in all the time. And they have some guy run a couple cattle on their land once in a while. And the expense of the whole thing was written off as, cattle operations. You think they ever made any money? Expectation of profit?
Of course not. I don't know why you have all them books in front of you.
Exactly. Creative folks. Okay, so that's self-employment tax. Estimated tax payments, talked about that. You're not getting withheld on as an employee, you need to make your own payments, quarterly. Don't make them timely, they're gonna penalize you at the end of the year, like an interest charge. Think about what your taxes are, pay a fourth of it every quarter. This little form you fill out, 1040-P, I think, get on that website, and you send your check into the, whatever address, depending on where you live, you send a check to the government, pay your estimated taxes. That covers, for a minister in our example, he had, what, $7,700? 7,700, yeah, 75 for federal tax and self-employment tax. You just carve that up in 4 and make 4 checks. Pay at the end of every quarter, last one in January. You'll be fine. You can ask your church treasurer to withhold taxes out of your check too, if you want to use that. You know, you don't want to remember to do it. You tell your treasurer, just take $200 out for income tax. It's called income tax withholding. No, write the check to the government for you, take it out of your paycheck. You get that one too. We talked about another activity, speaking fees, flex publishing. This is a big myth that people get caught on because they think I don't get a 1099 from somebody. It's not taxable. Well, as an IRS agent, I can tell you they can figure it out. We have tools.
Guys know your numbers, huh?
Yeah, there's records, trust me. There's ways to figure it out. Don't play that game. Ain't worth it.
Good news is, unless you're Max Lucado,
Yeah.
you don't make a whole lot of money on your points.
There's a lot of athletes that, you know, when they sign those cards, what do they call those things, Wes? Baseball cards?
Oh, yeah.
They sign those things, they make a lot of money on that.
Yeah.
A lot of guys didn't report that. A lot of our baseball players, athletes have a lot of tax trouble. Not picking that up.
Take off to the Caymans.
What's it say? Whatever source derives. What if, as Danny would say, what's the word say?
So there's no exceptions to that. Now, I don't want to keep going backwards, but when you say that, and then you go to the gift thing, because that happens all the time. I mean, I've been to little places, of course, it's $5 or it's $10, here you go, or it's a 20.
What's a gift?
Well, that's what I'm saying, that's the
It's
exception.
defined in the code and the case law. So the code is what the Congress writes. Part of this is regulations that the Congress tells the administration of. And the Supreme Court and the other courts, there's actually a whole tax court system just with tax cases of so many. They help define the rules. So what's a gift? It may mean something to you different than it does to me, right? So there's a definition in the court cases. Interesting is a big case in this area. It talks about a disinterested party giving you something of value for nothing in exchange. Disinterested in your activities.
Why would they give you money if they're disinterested?
Well, they're not getting anything in exchange. I think the concept they're trying to say is that, Wes, I'm having you come speak for us in the whole thing. I'm giving you $500 just as extra money. Well, I'm interested in what you're doing. You're coming to provide a service, right? You're doing something in exchange. That's not a gift.
That's interested, not disinterested, though.
Well, for a gift, it's sort of they use the term disinterested.
It's got a different meaning.
Poorly.
Yeah. Hey, these are Supreme Court gifts. You gotta tell you.
So I see what you're saying. There's no tie. There's no return, no expectation.
Here's $500, Wes.
Okay. And that's a gift, which, going back to my original thing, is that's the exception to every piece of revenue.
That's right. 61, everything, whatever source derived taxable unless excluded by Congress. Gifts are section 102 of the code.
And gifts would be our biggest exception, right?
Yep. Inheritance also, not taxable.
Yeah. Gifts would be my...
Yeah. But you think about it, you've heard gift tax, inheritance tax, death taxes?
Yeah.
How can it be taxed if it's not taxable? Not taxable to who gets it, but to who gives it is a tax. If I give somebody more than a certain amount a year, I gotta pay tax.
So Duberstein deals with the intention of the giver.
The giver. It's all about the giver's intent.
Now, how is that measured?
No kidding. Because if he goes and speaks at
Facts and circumstances.
at Freed, and they're like, oh, you're a good guy, Neal. Here's $1 million.
I think that's clear, that's gonna be taxed.
Not a consideration.
But what if he's there, and a member of that congregation or another congregation gives Neal $10,000 and say, Neal, here's just $10,000. Is that a gift? Likely.
I think so.
Right? If he gives him more than $13,000, he's gonna have to pay gift tax.
But may I say that that's not a very common.
Right. Let's make this realistic. Let's say 9,000. That's what Neal's gets.
Okay,
Yeah. On average.
So Neal wouldn't have to pay any taxes on that. Does he still have to report it, in a sense?
still waiting for that.
No reporting. And the reporter is on.
Got our heavenly reward, brother.
If you give over a certain threshold amount, then the giver has to report.
Right, but Neal wouldn't have to report his $9,000.
Just keep the record. He would have to explain it, because if he ever gets audited, the agent looks at his bank statement and says, hey, where'd that come from? Who's that from?
So he still needs to keep a record, but it doesn't have to be reported.
That's right. You always gotta keep a record.
They can look into her bank account?
Oh, they do. We had tools taught to us as agents on how you investigate. You know, you think about the IRS, it's 100,000 employees. 15,000 of those employees are CPA, accountants, attorneys that do field examinations. That's what I did. They're the ones that are taught all this. Over 5 years it took me.
That's all?
And then techniques on audit, forensic techniques they call them. How to talk to people, how to find out what they do for a living, where they vacation, where their kids go to school.
Wow.
What goes in your bank account, what doesn't go in your bank account.
They locked the door with
What's outside your house, what kind of cars you drive, how big's your house? Right? So the IRS has a lot of tools at their disposal to figure it out. Now, don't get too nervous. There's only 15,000 of those agents. How many citizens are there?
300.
About 110 file tax returns. Less than 1% really do like that.
Yeah, but you're one of them.
And most of the audits you get are just correspondence audits, they call them. Hey, we saw you got a 1099 Neal from Memphis. Why didn't you put in the return?
So
That
you,
kind of thing.
you rarely go to somebody's house then. Make
Field audits. I did those when I first started. Those aren't fun. Table audits, they call them. It's a lot of animosity, a lot of emotions. But yeah, if you're running a business out of your house, or you got a lot of strange deductions on your return, large deductions, unusual, you get a score. Score your return every year. You know that? It's like getting a grade in school. Not the same kind of thing. You don't want an A in this case.
Wow.
Well, they do that at the service centers. But, you know, they're looking for the real abusive situations, right? Where people are playing some games. Keep your deduction records. I said I'll talk about it later, but tax records, 3 years for the federal government. So keep them 4, just in case. States are like 6. So most people keep their key tax records for 7 years. After that, you're just storing some paper in the result.
I'm paranoid. I've had mine for so many years.
You know,
They come to your house now before?
I kept my pay stubs and W-2s for 20 years. And I was an IRS agent. I finally got rid of it. You know, you don't need this. 7 years max. The federal government has 3 years to audit you. The states extended to 4 or 6, depending on what state.
So why do you keep it for longer?
Some things have consequence beyond the year. Definitely things like house purchases, you want to keep that permanent. Even though you may have sold your house about 4 years ago, okay, it should be excluded, but you deferred that gain, there's sort of a rollover issue on the basis of what you paid for the house to the next house.
In other words, it's like statute of limitations on most things there are, but some things there aren't.
Permanent things like house purchases, those kind of things, life insurance proceeds, gifts, that's 3 years for gifts. Certain things you want to keep longer, but general rule, most people keep things 7 years, and you're fine. If you don't get audited within the first 24 months of filing your tax return, you're not going to get audited. I can just tell you from the administrative practices, that's how you do things. Correspondence audits will come faster. Real field audits within 24 months. They've got a lot of returns to process, a lot of things to get done. 110 tax returns a year, maybe. 15,000, do the math. That's a lot. It takes a lot of time to do a field audit. A lot of questions, a lot of things you're doing. Church staff and secretaries. So you're likely your spouses will get involved and do something with the church, and they'll get paid. Is that exempt? Is that taxable? Do they get a parsonage allowance? Are they employee? They're an employee, but they're a regular employee. They're not doing ministerial duties, as they call it. So they're going to not have a parsonage allowance. They're not going to have those kind of benefits. They're just like a regular employee at a regular company. They'll pay FICA. Church will share you with only FICA taxes and paying some for them as well. And income taxes. Our secretaries, our librarians, they all fall in this category. If you have somebody that's doing, cleaning work in the building, same thing. If you're controlling them, they're an employee. So just ministers, and that has a large definition of what that means. A lot of case law, a lot of regulations of this, but generally doing ministerial type activities, which includes teaching at the school, teaching at seminaries, extension schools, mission efforts. It's all qualified activities, not just those that perform in the denominational world. That's usually the example of bishops, folks that wear the funny outfits that do the ceremonies in the front. Officiants, right? That's the general definition. Cantors in the Jewish faith are allowed. So it's a very broad definition, but you have to fit within it. So when your wives do work for the church, not likely going to be qualified. They're going to be regular employees. Tax credits. Are there any special tax credits for ministers? No. Sorry. But there are things to keep in mind that are key tax credits to remember. When you start having kids, there's child tax credit, $1,000. Not refundable. Now that's a key term to know. Refundable, not refundable. What does that mean? Refundable means if I otherwise don't owe tax and I get this credit, I otherwise qualify for it, the government will send me the money. I get a check from the government. That's refundable. Those are good ones. Regular tax credits just mean if I owe tax, it reduces what I owe to zero, and that's it. So my example I ran for you, the $50,000 married one child, there's a $1,000 tax credit in that calculation. Right? You get $1,000 credit against their income tax. That's why they have that.
Are we talking standard deduction right now?
So you got three things. So when you do your income tax calculation, you start with all your income. You start subtracting things. First thing is exemptions, personal exemptions. That's how many bodies in the house, right? And this year, every body's worth $3,900, right? Every dependent they own, there's a test for that. $3,900, deduct that from your income. Standard deduction for a married couple, it's like $12,100. That's a standard deduction. That means you don't have to keep any records for it. You're given $12,000 as a starting point. If you have spent $15,000 in qualified deductions, take that. Don't take the standard, take your actual. You have to do an itemized schedule, keep all your receipts, all those things. Then you take that, right? And then that's your two. Then you got your credits. Then you figure your tax. You take those two things, your exemptions, your deductions. You figure out, okay, what's left? That's taxable income. Times the rate, whatever that rate is, 10% for the first $18,000 you made. So if you figure this couple here with one kid, they're not paying tax on the first $24,000, basically. Right? And then the next dollar they earn, they pay 10% federal tax. For the next $18,000. $18,000 from the first dollar to the next $55,000, they pay 15%. Progressive tax rate system. Wonderful little progressive system. The more you make, the more they take. That was our line of IRS. The more you make, the more they take. How do you pay less tax? Make less income. That's what I said. I didn't think it was funny either. So yeah, progressive. It's funny they talk about flat tax now. Yeah. Our first tax in 1913 was a flat tax, 2%. On today's dollars, I think it was about $200,000 of income before you paid 2%. Lasted about a year. There's a reason they have these rules, not just to raise revenue, it's to control, right? It's power. Legislative power. right? They can incentivize certain activities, disincentivize other activities, right? That's a lot of control power. So I'm not likely gonna see a flat tax.
Trying to get it forever. They've been talking about it forever.
It's a matter of surrendering power. They can get the same dollars, but they've got to give up the power. Who's going to vote away their own power? Right? Okay, so that's the tax credit. So there's the child tax credit for sure. That's still around. Earned income tax credit. You may have heard of this thing, EITC. Something That's a refundable credit. That's a big cash. This year it can range from $3,000 to $6,000 per family a year of cash, if you qualify, right? Our example of a $50,000 minister, you make too much money. You got to be at under $43,000 to get any of it, and the less you make to a certain point, the more you get. It's like a bell curve. Think about a bell curve. At the far end of this thing is $43,000 for a married couple, where you get zero. At the beginning, if you don't make anything, you get zero. Right? You got to make something to get it. Earned income tax credits. You have earnings. You got to have wages. So as you make money, and there's usually a range. And I remember doing this, coming up with a max position on the bell curve. Every tax guy's like trying to maximize your position, where you can earn about, I think it's $15,000 to $17,000. If you're in that range, you maximize your pay. You start making more than $17,000, your credit goes down from $6,000 down. People will actually do the math and stop working during the year and say, I don't want to make another $1,000 this year. All you can do is $3,000 tax credit. Talk about incentivizing abnormal behavior.
A dependent child who's worked and made some money, he's not qualified. Is that correct?
Well, dependent, that's a key term now. Words, right?
Yeah.
What's the word say? Dependent means something in the tax code, to be a dependent of somebody. There's 5 characteristics you have to usually go through. I won't go through them. But if you're a dependent of somebody, they can claim you and get that benefit, potentially, that tax credit. They still have to pay tax on their own income, but they don't get a standard deduction.
It's easier to figure out. But
You took it. Yeah. And so they're still going to pay some income tax. Now, probably not as much at a lower rate, right? They still get a personal exemption. I mean, they get a personal exemption, not a standard deduction. So they get something that's tax-free, $3,900. But they get no deduction, no standard deduction. But it depends. I mean, you think about the example here, the one child saves this couple probably $1,600 in tax. The $1,000 tax credit, and then the personal exemption for $3,900. Take it times the tax rate, it's about 60. So. But you have to be qualified. It's not a choice you can make if they're dependent. What do the words say? There's a test. You meet the test, you're dependent. You don't meet it, you're not dependent. It's all about, do they provide their own support? Their housing, their food, their clothes, that kind of thing. Are they on their own? They may still be living in your house. They may pay dad and mom some money for rent. My dad told me at 17, you pay the rent and you move. I moved. You rent somewhere else. But yeah, so they can be in your house and not your dependent. They don't have to be your kid to be your dependent. Somebody can be in your house unrelated to you. If you're supporting them, you're your dependent.
in a situation like that, you assume their liability? If you
Just the tax, just tax code stuff.
Okay.
So as far as, personal insurance liability, any other kind of liabilities for their actions and activities, there may be. But from a tax code standpoint, it's something totally different. Actually, and it's sad to say in this world, people will live together and not be married. Are they dependents of each other? From a tax code standpoint, you can be married for the tax code and not have gotten married. A lot of people do that. Some don't. Actually, it's beneficial from a tax viewpoint not to be married. Talk about incentives and disincentives. That's a disincentive to normal behavior.
I know people that kill all these rules with the child income, earned income,
tax
and
credit.
the marriage things. I mean, they
Think
have
about
different
this.
children and different people claim
Think
these
about this.
children.
Both of you work and you make average jobs. You're making, I don't know, $10, $15 an hour. Right? What is that? More than $30,000 a year. $20,000 a year, you get a pretty good tax credit. If you're head of household and have a child dependent.
If you have three, you get more, right?
$4,000, $5,000, right? 1, 2, 3, right? More. If you're married and you add those two together, you don't qualify for any credit.
Yeah.
So it's an incentive that creates abnormal behavior.
Yeah.
Michael, just for my notes here, in the EITC,
Yep.
is the number they're looking at net or gross?
Gross.
Okay.
Gross. And it includes your self-employment income. And we'll talk about this exemption for self-employment tax. If you exempt yourself from self-employment tax, you don't include your self-employment income in this calculation. The example I ran, $50,000, 20,000 parsonage allowance, the guy is not exempt from self-employment tax, he is paying it. He would not qualify for the credit. 50 is more than 43. But if he's exempt from self-employment tax, and only ministers can do this, plus members of certain religious bodies, Christian Science.
Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah. You can exempt yourself from self-employment tax system, Social Security system, on your earnings as a minister only. If you do that, then that parsonage allowance amount, when you say, I got $50,000, I say the $20,000 parsonage, my W-2, my taxable wages are now 30 from an income tax point of view. And if you exempt it from self-employment tax, from the tax credit point of view, it's not 30. So you can actually get the credit. Not to focus on the numbers, because that's not the way to make that decision. The $50,000 example, the $20,000 parsonage, how much is tax did he pay? $7,500 in self-employment taxes. If he had exempted himself from that tax, he pays zero self-employment tax, not $7,500 bucks. His total tax is $200 for family's tax, and then likely could qualify that income level for a credit. So you probably change the number $8,000, $9,000.
But then you waive your right to Social Security, right?
So talk about the exemption, right? It's the form 4361. It's a one-time election and it's permanent. You can't undo it. You can't change your mind. But you got to make it early. This is by the second year that you've made self-employment income as a minister, and that means, guys, if you're preaching out and making $400 when you're here, your clock has started. You've got to decide this by the time you file your second tax return. So, 2.5 years, 3 years. By the time you file that return, you've got to make this decision. And it's a permanent decision. And all it says is, I'm exempting myself from the Social Security system. I'm not going to take the benefits of it. I'm not going to contribute to it. Some do, some don't.
Well, what if you've already had enough risk in it?
Now, this is only for ministerial duties, right? So guess what, if you work somewhere else, or you work somewhere else again? You do books, publications, speaking. That's still taxable. So yeah, if you work 40 quarters anyway, you're going to qualify for Social Security benefits.
Yeah, because they already sent me a letter.
Right. 10 years, 40 quarters, whatever it is, you're still going to qualify. A lot of ministers will do other work too, you know, before and after and during. So you can still qualify for Social Security benefits. It's just this category of income you've exempted from self-employment tax.
So it just pauses or it stops. Like, I just did this.
Yeah.
Because I worked up to a certain point, I paid in all that FICA. But then I started being self-employed technically about 1.5 years ago. So my clock was running out. Michael just talked to me about that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I've already paid in 25 years worth of FICA. So there will be some Social Security for me, if it's still there.
Exactly.
There will be some Social Security coming to me when the time is right. But I just won't be adding to it from this point on.
Exactly.
So I'll be taking the advantage of now
Yeah.
what is available to me at this point, if that makes sense.
And you can.
But then if this pans out and I go back to work at Walmart or whatever, then I just go ahead and just start adding back in because I have no choice.
Exactly.
Can you discuss the Any ethical or moral implications of the decision?
I'm just a tax guy.
Okay.
You gotta read the form,
Okay.
what it says. Some folks do, some folks don't. There's another form, don't get mixed up in this one, it's a 4029. This is for members of certain religious bodies. The Amish, Christian Science practitioners. They have a special, because they basically in their own society take care of their own folks, right? They have their own Social Security net. And so they're otherwise opposed to this kind of system. So they're given a separate exception, not just ministers, but everybody. The layperson, doesn't matter if you're a minister, preacher, or of those organizations.
Hasn't the IRS a few times through the years opened a window?
Once.
Just once?
Yeah.
Where there was no penalty to get back in?
You could elect or unelect.
And then it's permanent, you could not unelect again.
That's right. And that window, I mean, who knows if they'll do it again. But there was that time.
So even back in like the 70s, they didn't do it?
No, there was a change in, there was something. They had sort of flip on this. But yeah, I wouldn't expect another window to unelect.
It's not a periodic,
No.
just a
It's a permanent election. Permanent election. Read the form.
On the situation that Wes was describing, is there a minimal amount of time to pay in to be able to get benefits?
Typically, not being a Social Security benefits expert, I would tell you it's 40 quarters, 10 years. You qualify somewhere in your life for 40 quarters working for somebody if you're an employee and you're paying FICA taxes on it.
So 20 years, Air Force, I'm good.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and there's a couple of really easy, I mean, if you just Google it, there's a couple of really easy charts. It'll just
Okay.
tell you, I mean,
Go to the
and it'll
Social
tell you
Security
what you're,
Perfect.
it'll even tell you at 62, this is what you're available for.
Yeah, they actually mail you a
65,
form.
yeah.
I don't know if you guys get that. Anybody get that in the mail?
Yeah,
Social Security?
I got one.
Once in a while, they'll send you a form recapping your history of FICA.
every year.
Oh, you get one every year? I get one.
Every
And it
year.
tells you what your potential payout is, monthly, whatever it is.
You have to be one employer for 10 years?
No, any self-employed or otherwise.
Okay.
You can be
You
self-employed.
just need a opinion for 10
40
years.
quarters. And the benefit is somewhat calculated based on how much you pay. Somewhat. Honestly, it's not
And that's
dollar for dollar. The more you pay, the more you get. No. Actually, you get less. And then, unfortunately, guess what? What's the code say? Whatever social right? So when you get a social security benefit, you think it's taxable?
Yes.
No.
It just never stops.
It never stopped. Clinton made that change. It used to be exempt. But Clinton made that change. Unemployment compensation used to be exempt.
Yep.
They changed that. So self-employment, social security benefits are taxable if you make enough money.
Workman's comp?
Yes. No, workman's comp is insurance, private insurance, not taxable. But I know another one of those good excuses.
Yeah, I never.
Life
did.
insurance proceeds, not taxable. Good estate plan.
Michael, that was the best explanation I've ever had of that, I've ever heard. Yeah.
Finances, guys. What to think about there? I mean, we covered all the tax stuff. Any general questions about finance in general? Or
You like what stock to buy?
not CFP? CPA. So I've been in tax for 26 years. You may have some unusual questions. Feel free to ask them. I've worked on all sides, guys. I've been with the government. I've been with an accounting firm, defending companies, and now I work for. I've seen it from all three sides.
Well, I had I think it's 2001, 2. I had an issue with the IRS. They didn't want to give my income tax, child credit tax.
Yeah.
And I never resolved that. And they still say I owe $5,000.
In 2001. They got 10 years to get the money from you.
Okay.
You wait them out. Statute of limitations applies. You only have so much time to collect this. That's one thought. You can still defend your position. As long as there's still a collection matter, you can still defend it.
Last time they sent me a letter, I still defended my position.
And they never get it.
And
There's
they haven't sent. That was 2 years ago.
Yeah, no, there's some issues of why they can deny you your credit. So it depends on what issue they're raising.
Right. Well, they sent me, I didn't have an enrollment thing for my son in the school, so I sent that to them.
Oh, yeah, proving
They still didn't.
So it's a dependency test.
Yeah.
They're going through that. This is
Right.
dependent. Right. Especially if they can live outside your house, especially when they're at school and college, right? And still be dependents. Right? Just don't want money.
I can prove that.
So they can be out of your house but still dependent, right? So you gotta still prove it though. And so they may be having an issue with your proving their dependency.
There's an age limit on becoming a dependent
There is.
child. 25?
Well, the credit is 17 for the earned income tax credit.
Okay.
For the regular dependents, to be a dependent, I think it goes to, well, they don't get married, 24.
Okay.
Once they get married, all bets are off. They cannot be your dependent. You may still pay for them. Not that I've had that situation though.
I don't even know how to ask this, but in general speaking, is there anything that we can take advantage of obviously within the laws, about sending kids to college, or even more specifically, a Christian university? Does any of that matter, or is it just all?
There's no specific tax benefit or deduction because they go to a Christian school versus any school.
Okay.
But they qualify equal
Okay.
for any of the benefits that are covered. There are deductions, loan interest deductions. There's credits. They extended it again for another year, the American Opportunity Credit. First 4 years of college, you get $1,000 refundable credit. Those are good ones. Total credit is $2,500. Depends on how much you spend on tuition, books, fees, room and board. I'm guessing you'll spend more than $2,500, especially OC. Harding? Yeah.
So is this something that we have to go sniff out to be aware of, or is this something that's obvious on?
It's not obvious on the form.
What's it called again?
The American Opportunity Tax Credit. It's the educational, just in the publication 17, there'll be some information about educational credits for your dependents, your children. And so there's some deductions and credits. Unfortunately, guys, there's income limitations. So when you start making too much money, you start losing the benefits.
Where was that on the?
Publication 17, that's a general go-to
The
publication.
same one where you just
Yes,
mentioned earlier?
they're expensive. It's a standard. This is the one you'd go to Best Buy or Office Max and pay $50 for, and the government will give it to you for free. So don't go buy the one at Office Max. It's the same thing. They almost reprint and put a little commentary after some of the stuff. So just get the Pub 17. It's downloadable. It's a PDF on the IRS website.
Okay.
Michael, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say tax help in general, guys. The websites are good with caution. IRS website gives you their viewpoint. I was there. They have a viewpoint. Rules are not absolute in the code. They're not that well written where it's easy to say A is A and B is B. They're going to take the government's position. So just know that when you read a publication. You can go to other tax firms of different stripes. The more certified, the better. Attorneys, CPAs, of course, have more training, more technical experience, but you're going to pay for it. It's going to be expensive. You can go to a non-CPA and get as good a job as a CPA. Maybe better.
TurboTax.
TurboTax, I use that. But I have a little training, so I sort of know the tool. So if you don't know the code, you can make it through TurboTax. It's a pretty good question-answer kind of based system. It'll ask you things and take you to the right place. But if it doesn't answer the question you should have asked, or you answer it wrong, because tax terms are specific.
Do you happen to know if TurboTax, and I haven't asked Terry this, but if TurboTax talks about the college, what you
It definitely does.
It definitely,
Parsonage allowance, it talks all about that.
no, but I mean the college.
It talks about the college credits and deductions. And the nice thing is, those things are really good to run the limitation calculations. When X amount of income is made, you get X less deduction, or Y less deduction. Rather than go to the tables and figure it all out, it'll do that math for you, which
Yes.
but it may not know what question it should ask, or you may answer it wrong, and not know exactly how to answer that question. I had to, family and friends have come to me because I worked at IRS with questions, and they get audits and letters. And they go in for the first time and talk to the agent, and they say things, and I said, "You said what?" That means something different to them than it does to you. You just told them. What you think you said isn't what you said, and now we're going to have to walk those words back and say, "Here's what he meant to say." Right? Not that you're lying or misspoke. It's just that
You need an interpreter.
you do.
You didn't speak IRS.
This is written in English.
I remember.
It's not English. So it's tax words, right? So when they talk about when you're traveling or with residents or those kind of things have long histories in the code. That's what they mean. And they don't mean what a layperson thinks they mean. So,
Like disinterested.
disinterested, yes. See? To me, that makes total sense. I'm confused why you don't understand it. So yeah, so if you've got somebody in your congregation that works with the IRS, hey, ask them some questions. Let me know a guide you. I don't prepare returns for you, but I'll help you. Right? And there's other members that can help you that have done tax, been trained. You'll find them in all the congregations. It's funny, a lot of accountants end up being directors. So, yeah, we're definitely willing to help, but there are other tax help deals. There's free tax seminars you go to that are staffed by IRS agents, by public accounting firm people, basic returns, low-income returns. And then you start thinking, okay, I want to get a professional to do it, right? You have a professional do yours. How much do you want to pay? Where do you want to take it? How complicated is my return? First time you do something, it's probably hard for you. What did Einstein say? It's hard to figure it out, but once you figure it out, it's just repeating somebody else's work. That's not so hard. Right? So you go somewhere, maybe they do it first year or two for you. You can see the forms now and see where the numbers flow. Or your wife, maybe.
I know if you're single, it's not
Save
that
it. It'll cost you $1,000 more to get a tax return. Maybe a couple thousand. They got a lot of costs. They got employees, software, office expense. They can't just do it for $200.
Cadillacs.
H&R Block. You're getting somebody that does it part-time. You know, you're getting people that get trained every year to sort of prepare tax returns.
Yeah.
You saw the commercial, right?
That was going.
That's always made me nervous, even if I've never used anything like that. Just feel like they're not.
We call them VITA when I was at the IRS. I used to teach people voluntary income tax assistance, like H&R Block people. We take a couple of weeks and I teach them some basic tax law, run through Pub 17. Here's a 1040, here's a Schedule A, here's what goes on what. And they get sent out new returns.
So they sound good to the layperson, but really there's not much underneath the.
Yeah, now that's not always the case, because some of these firms, even H&R Block, will have long-term people that do this all for years. Very skilled people, smart, right? Get quality work out. But the IRS tried to register tax preparers this year, force you to pass their test to do a tax return. Unconstitutional. Got kicked out last 2 weeks.
Really? I think there's somebody that probably is.
Government doesn't have the authority to regulate that activity. Under what authority do they have to say that you can or cannot do this kind of activity? Right? It's like anything else. Who can be a hairdresser? Who can be states may have some licensing. I'm licensed as a CPA for the state of Colorado. I have to abide by certain ethical rules, continuing education requirements, but the federal government can say I can or cannot practice in the tax code. There are limitations, right? Pub 517, that's a good one, publication 517 for ministry. A lot more focus on ministerial things. Deductions, income exclusions, talks about the self-employment tax exemption.
Could you give us a little bit more information about other monies that are taxable income? I wrote down in parentheses weddings and funerals. I know you can't be exhaustive, but can we get a kind of an idea there? Speaker fees, weddings, funerals.
Definitely speaker fees. Anytime you write or publish something that you get a royalty or a payment for. Anytime you're exchanging your service for some. It doesn't have to be money. It can be chickens, it can be laptops, it can be clothes, rice.
Chickens.
You know, somebody pays your hotel bill, you don't turn the receipt in, if you don't run it right. That can be included. It's all about that expense reimbursement and those kind of things. The travel costs are different. Somebody's paying your travel cost. Generally, as they're getting the receipts, don't expect that to be income. Most folks, if they do it, if they ask ahead of time and get some details, they won't give you a 1099 for your travel costs. They'll just give it for your speaker. Okay? If you don't get it right, that doesn't mean what's on the form, you're dead in the water, you have to pay tax on it. That's just their form they send you, doesn't mean it's the end of the story.
You can incur expense
Or you can just read the form.
that's not, included in that. So let's say that you have meals that you have to take care of on your
Or
own.
other costs, other incidentals.
Your, parking for 6 days.
You pay Wi-Fi fees,
Right.
right? Airport, the hotel, you gotta pay additional fees.
Boingo, yeah. Well, now, how would that work if it's a monthly fee that you pay for Boingo, but you're only using it?
You can still take the monthly, because it's used for business,
Okay.
right? You may have an issue about proration, where they say, you know what, you really use this when you're traveling on personal vacations as well as business vacations, so maybe there's a proration issue.
So the daily rate with something like Boingo is almost as much as a monthly.
Exactly. I've done that a few airports where it's $30 to sign up. And the funniest thing is, I don't know if you guys travel much in the hotels. The moderate or low price hotels get free internet. The higher price hotels charge. It never made sense to me. You stay at a $300 night plus hotel, you gotta pay $30 for internet.
I figure you can afford
You
it.
stay at the Residence Inn, $70 free internet. I don't get that. Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking of something else, but you had like a question.
I've had that look since we started class.
I try to make it as non-technical as possible. I try to give you some basic points, the big points to think about, and some percentages to keep in your head, and so you're going to hear about a lot of crazy ideas in some small parts, different parts of this country, and they'll talk to you about, hey, you can pay no tax. Just listen to this, or follow this formula. Be really skeptical.
In retrospect, and generally speaking, we're not all that complicated, are we? I mean, in this business.
A few things, right?
Right.
Parsonage allowance is huge. The expense account is typical for any business.
But I mean, basically speaking, if we can kind of get a grip on our big things, then we can kind of protect ourselves.
That's why I try to do that example to sort of give you a flavor of the difference between a regular employee and a minister. So you can see the touch points where it's different, right? The self-employment tax is huge, right? I mean, that's a huge difference. And then the parsonage allowance.
So the accountable plan, parsonage allowance, self-employment tax exemption, if you elect.
If you elect, that's right. And then you get the expense accounts, but that's all industries, not just ministers. I mean, that's a typical thing you do in business as well. But you see it more in this area because honestly, at companies, they just reimburse you for your business expense separate from your pay. Here you can carve out part of your pay for this. That's, I guess, unique to the industry. Same rules apply, but most companies don't say, I'm going to pay you $50,000. Oh, you want me to pay some of your business expenses? Well, that'll be out of your $50,000.
Right.
Most companies will pay that on top. Like for my company, I go to training activities, I go to seminars, they pay for my license fees, my association fees. It doesn't come out of my basic income. I would argue churches should do the same.
Do you pay taxes on that?
Nope.
Okay, so let me ask you something that we've done here. We've tried to, and I've talked to them about when you negotiate. So I haven't talked about the tax standpoint of it, yeah. But the educational opportunity where you go for a seminar to further your education or buy books.
Yeah.
Is it a receipt versus not receipt? Is it just?
It is.
Okay, so, but.
The tax basis is, can you document to the company, your employer, the expense, and it is a qualified business expense.
So you bring it back to them and you say, this check was cut, this amount was spent related to this.
Qualified. Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's right. And we do that here. I mean, there's sometimes the elders or some of the folks we'll pay to send them to PTP, right? And so they turn in their documentation. That's not additional income to these guys, right?
As long as you document.
As long as you document.
When you document to your employer, not to your tax preparer.
You can do it either way.
Okay.
Document to your employer, it's not taxable. You don't document to your employer,
Then
you
it's
deduct it.
income that you have.
But guess what? Standard deduction. Am I really going to get benefit from it? It's part of my old standard. If I don't have enough other deductions, I'm not going to get over that standard amount. So
That's something all these guys will probably do or seek to do is to go be paid or be sent to a seminar, maybe to come back from Bear Valley lectures, whatever it is. They need to know how to handle it.
Yeah, definitely get provide the receipts back to your treasurer, so they don't have to include that in there. That's the key.
Do you guys do this every year?
See what?
This class?
No, it's the first time I ever did it.
I hope we'll do it again.
Well, I hope I covered enough for you.
You did.
Well, I was gonna ask these guys, since they were the first one, this is my first time too. If they're like me, it would have helped to have had a dry board. And have you do that? Would it have helped you guys visually, or can you just soak it up verbally?
Yeah, sure.
Well, Polycom took care of our.
I think a photocopy here.
Well, I mean, we can call one in or switch a class or something.
Here's my example. That's what I'm gonna write on the board.
I'm gonna make copies of that, and I'll get it to all of you.
When I was gonna volunteer then this,
Yeah.
I was gonna volunteer next class, if you do this next time.
I'll take a board.
I'll help you with some printout stuff to hand out.
Okay.
With some examples and kind of put some of those examples together so we can go back and refer to it, because this stuff will be like mush to me.
Yeah. And then churches in general, why don't they pay tax? The guy who left, 501c3, right, another code section. So churches are statutorily exempt from tax. You don't have to file an application. You don't file income tax returns. We're exempt activity. Right? So we don't otherwise have to worry about income taxes, but we are an employer, so we still have to deal with payroll taxes. So all the payroll tax stuff applies. All the 1099 stuff applies to us. We can do prohibited activities. There are some controls the government has on us. A church can do things against the code.
Political activities.
And political activities to a certain level. And they can take your exemption away. Yeah. Right. A lot of famous examples are these televangelists, right? They set up these theaters and these amusement parks. All that is tax-free initially, right? And then they realize what they're really doing is a commercial enterprise. And so they've lost their status. They've made them taxable. So what does that mean for you? You can't give money to that organization, they get a deduction on it. It's not a tax deduction, it's not a charity. Plus the charity itself is not a charity, it pays income tax on the money.
But adhering to New Testament principles is probably going to keep a church in the 501.
We're not at risk. Although people would think about the school. You know, it's not a core church activity, right? It's a seminary. But they'll still fall within that definition, educational purposes. We've actually thought about, should we have a separate election made? Because if you're an educational charity, you have to get permission to be exempt. We've thought about doing that separately, but we just keep it under the eldership. It's one operation. So from the tax standpoint, it's one entity.
And contributors like that better.
It's easier for them. Yeah. Private foundations you can contribute to, limit your deduction. It's not as good as just giving to a regular charity. So from a giver standpoint, it's a different kind of thing. But you have to be a pretty high income level before it matters, or a high giver.
That'll never be me. It'll be all right.
As far as records on contributions, so they just got these done this year. You do have to keep more than just, typically you just keep like a check or a bank statement to prove you made a payment to the church for a contribution. If you ever give $250 or more, $250, or one time, then you need a special letter from the church by the time you file your return. So don't ask me during the year. You don't need it. I can give you the regulation.
It's me. I need it now.
Until you file your return. But yeah, you need that letter. Otherwise, you're at risk for deduction. And I've done plenty of those audits where people come in and taken huge deductions, and some people got their stack of checks. I could used to get your checks back. Some folks just put the yellow pages and say, I gave $5,000 to that organization and $7,000 to that. One of the funniest things, audit, wrapping up, one of the funniest things you can do on an audit is look at a schedule of expenses. And one thing you look for is the first number on each is the same. And people will do that. They're frauding. They just add 1 to every number. So instead of $500 this and $75 that and $2,000 there it is, but now it's $1,200, $1,500. I've seen this many times. People think that's an easy way to add to their expenses.
And that's greed.
Because they look at the end of the number and they say, that's odd, it's like $215 or $300. But you look down the schedule and every number is a 1 in front of it. That's unusual.
Well, thank you for being here. Guys, we'll be dealing with meet the congregation and the preacher as an administrator after that.
Thanks a lot, Michael.
She sounds a little sick today. But this personality, be male or female, young or old, that is individual, but these traits are pretty common. I have done local work in Alabama, Virginia, and Colorado, so basically 3 different sections of the country, one Atlantic, one Mid-Atlantic, the other the Southeast, and now in the West. And these folks are here, there, and everywhere, so you will find them. All right, number 1 is Mr. Come On Strong. Now, you may have some idea on some of these what is intended, but let me suggest to you with this first personality, Mr. Come On Strong, this is the guy, usually guy, who comes straight to the preacher and wants to be one of your best friends. Now, that's flattering, isn't it? You know, I mean, it says, oh, the preacher's a likable guy, and he wants to, he just, you know, he sees something in my personality, and he wants to be a good friend. As a general rule of thumb, these will never be lasting friends. What generally goes with a personality type like that is just real quick to want to think everything you say is great, everything that you are is great. What's typically the other side of that? Somebody who just thinks, oh, you're the best thing since sliced bread. What typically happens is it doesn't take very much for you to fall off that pedestal.
Oh,
and then they're going to be aggravated with you. They're going to think that you're, you know, that quick to admire is quick to criticize.
As soon as you disagree with it.
It could be that.
That's what happens.
Yeah, or it could be that you pay attention to somebody else, or any number of things. They're just typically a sensitive type person. Number 2 is Mr. What This Church Needs. That guy loves evangelism, and that ought to be your preeminent, exclusive interest. And so everything he proposes, he wants you to carry the water to the elders meeting, to the deacon, or whoever else. He wants you to be his voice. Now, do you see, why does he need you to be his voice?
Because he's already gotten, others have already shut him down.
That's it. He's warned himself. He's warned them out, and it means that he doesn't inherently have the influence himself, and so he wants to ride the coattails of your influence. Don't commit yourself to anything, especially without having time to give it thought. If somebody wants you to champion their cause or to be their mouthpiece, guys, my standard response is, well, hey, give me some more information about that. Let me think about it. Or let me go to the elders. Or let me, if you don't have an eldership, let's discuss this in a men's meeting. And if they start backtracking or equivocating, you realize
It's already been brought up 400 times.
Yeah, they're like, oh man, this guy is here. Is one trick pony. Here he comes again. So you got to watch out for what this church needs, because you're going to be a place 10 years and you won't know what all it needs. And for a guy to just have it all figured out, he doesn't. And don't let him pull you down with you, because he will. Number 3, you probably need some explanation to that one.
Yes.
Mr. and Mrs. occupy all your time telling you all their troubles. Sure.
Does anybody, I don't think anybody here is going to be going to Guatemala, or will you? Is anybody here?
I'm not going to be here. I want to go.
You can still go, so just.
I'd like to find more information.
Did you bring lunch?
No.
Okay, we're going to order some pizzas and we'll be in the high school classroom.
Can I still go?
Yeah?
I'll see you in the high school class.
Yeah, okay. So we've got 2 in here. Thank you.
Need to repeat that again? Okay.
Yeah,
all
read
the
it out.
time.
Mr. and Mrs. occupy all your time telling you all their troubles. Now, there's a couple of key words in there that crosses the line from being a compassionate person to being an enabler. Now, the key words as I see it is the same word, all.
Oh.
Occupy all your time
with all their troubles, because some folks never get to the bottom of their troubles, and they got 15,000 of them, and they want you to hear every one of them. And of course, the net effect of that is that it can really be a strain on your time. Not literally all your time, but it can be such a time-consuming activity. And we've talked about this. Guys, we need to always be sensitive. We need to always be compassionate. But we also don't need to let ourselves be used. I can just tell you honestly, although I don't think it's happened as much here, but in previous works, I have figured out that there are a few people that I try to do everything I can to keep everything off of their financial or health troubles, because it's at the very tip of where they are, and it's on. I mean, they wear it all the time, and it spills out constantly. There are some people obsessed with their health, and I can't remember. It was a very recent conversation when I was at the lectureship in Tennessee. Somebody I just met them. And they are, one of the first things after How Are You, My Name is their health issues. For 15 minutes, talked about the variety of things they dealt with. Now, I understand those of us who have good health, we should be thankful to God about that every day. There are some people who allow their problems to overwhelm them. We need to direct them to see the positive, to keep their eyes on heaven, and not to be so consumed with their own troubles, because really that's a form of trust.
Matthew 6.
That's right. There's a trust issue. There's a worry issue there. But there are some people I've tried to learn to avoid a lengthy conversation with, or to take out of my vocabulary that standard pat response, which is good. We can get into this trite habit of, hey, how are you? Fine, how are you? Have a good week, you too. But if you say, hey, how are you, to some this individual personality type, you're going to hear it, all of it. And there's a tipping point there, I guess is all I'm saying. Be aware that these individuals exist, and they will take up a bit of time. Number 4, Mr. Gigger. All right. Well, I don't know. Brad, you might have to help me with some of these.
Frog gigging?
Well, I'm not talking about. But maybe the same. What are you doing when you go frog gigging?
You find them and you stab them.
Okay, there you go. So that's what I'm talking about. The guy who's always taking a poke, who's always, and it's just a joke. I'm just playing around, or that's just my personality. But it's all the time. It's the way you dress. It's the way that it can be. If you go to a part of the country where it's not your inherent accent and it sounds different, it can be that. It can be your grammar. It can be but it's just always picking on something. Your weight, your something. Because all of us guys, honestly, right? I mean, especially the older we get, you're either losing hair, or you're gaining gut, or you're something. You're always dealing with something, and somebody can always find something to poke at you. And so that guy is there. Now, I just have found that the way you deal with that is to realize if a guy's always doing that, there's either some kind of inferiority that he feels. He's projecting his own insecurities. He's got his own success-oriented problems. He may be a success in business, but he may be faltering in other areas. That's a compensation to him. Because a spiritually healthy, socially healthy person doesn't have to do that. So don't take it personally. And don't give indication that it bothers you. What I would do in a situation like that is I would try to keep a person like that a little bit more at arm's length than the average person. Number 5. Did that help? If I'm not adequately describing any of these personalities and you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to ask me. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Have you found, have you ever tried going the other direction of just, inviting them into your home and trying to get to know them to I don't know if you could really get to the bottom of why they have to do that, or just kill them with love? I don't know. Yeah,
and the thing, just keep in your mind that we're not always able to help everybody's problems and quirks that they've taken years to get to. I think relationship is at the bottom of all of this. And being able to relate, I guess I was assuming that has taken place, that you have responded with kindness. You have followed Jesus's his inspired words in Matthew chapter 5 with the cloak and the cheek and all of that, and it's not working. But yes, I think that can help with a lot of things. Is we don't want a list of enemies. We want to make our enemies our friends. And this is not necessarily a person who's an enemy. He's a hypercritic. And you know people like that. They're just hypercritical. And they just are, no matter what relationship it is. But that's a good point, Chris. I think that's always key. Yes, sir.
I know a preacher friend of mine, there's a brother was always making fun of simple things about him or whatever it was. And he got really tired of it. And one Sunday, just before he went up to preach, while they were in the auditorium, that brother came and made a joke, and he said, "What? That's a joke. Give it to me. Let me watch it a while." And man, that brother felt so bad. Never tried. He told him, "Give me your joke. Let me wet it. It's a little bit too dry." That's a phrase we use in the Caribbean to say a joke. It's,
Yeah, I don't
no
think
matter,
it's
yeah,
funny to me.
it's not funny.
Well,
That brother never made a joke with the brother again.
yeah, if you know, you've got, you'll know the personality is going to be somewhat different, so you can handle these things differently. But I guess my point is, and how you deal with it, you're going to have to figure out, because each person will respond differently. You have somebody in your home that may melt it away. Other situations that might make it worse. I mean, they might get worse after you've done that. So just be aware he exists or she exists at various places you are. Because we're talking about group dynamics. All this is group dynamics. And every group has these kinds of personalities that surface for one reason or another. Number 5, Mr. Have you been to see? I think we got a little of this earlier in the class, didn't we? You know, the one who always wants to make sure that you're at every hospital visit you need to make. And they are keeping tabs, or they think they are. Sometimes they're wrong. Sometimes they assume, and they can assume wrong. And I think this was something I asked an older preacher, and he gave me that advice, and I have used it, and it has always, 100%, been effective. I turn it back on them, and I ask them, not at that moment, I'll wait, because you don't want to seem vindictive or reactive, but wait 3 or 4 weeks, somebody's been in the hospital, maybe somebody that, because a lot of times it's somebody that you had no way of knowing about. Somebody was in and out for a couple of days, they didn't tell anybody, but somehow, because it's usually a she, and usually she's, you know, she might be plugged into the gossip line or something, and she knows. Somebody told you. And so you're supposed to know that. So what I do is wait 3 or 4 weeks, maybe somebody who's a new Christian, who somebody's not in the Corps, who was in the hospital, and then I would just go in information. No sarcasm, no ugliness, no meanness, but go, you know, John Smith was in the hospital up at Swedish. Did you get by to see John? John Smith. I'm not sure. Well, you know, you know, we just baptized him last year. I'm sure he needs the encouragement. See, just what you're telling them is, look, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And so that's a way to handle that. But that personality exists. And if you're doing your work conscientiously, more often than not, you say, yes, I have. And such, you know, such and such family member was there. Not a Christian, you know, and so just watch. That can emerge. Sometimes it's just, not everybody that says, have you been to see, is Mr. Have you been to see. So don't get sensitive or thin-skinned about it.
Sensitive enough.
Number 6, Mr. Always correcting. Your grammar, the bulletin. You know, I have a rule about criticism, is I try to get the fruit, you know, as much as I can from whatever kind of criticism I'm receiving. Even if it's somebody who's negative, somebody who is hypercritical, I try to find that grain in there that can help me. But I don't kowtow or find myself consulting them as the one that I have to please. You know, I think of Colossians 3:23 and 24. I'm serving the Lord Christ, and He's the one I'm trying to please. And that's going to take care of a lot of things. You conscientiously do your work as somebody who's trying to serve the Lord and put Him first. A lot of these things take care of themselves. But this says more about them than it does about you. I don't know if I told you about there's a relationship I had with an elder one time. First couple of years, the only time I got to where I knew if he was coming up to me to say something about a sermon, it was something he didn't like. You know, one time I was talking, you know how you use illustrations from an illustration book, and I had used one that was attributed to St. Augustine. Well, you guys, we know And maybe that was an assumption on my part. Maybe it would have been better for me to say Augustine instead of St. Augustine. But some people, it's like Teresa of Calcutta. She's not my mother, and doesn't belong with that title, you know. But when we refer to her commonly, it's Mother Teresa.
That's what everybody knows about.
That's how, you might even know she's from Calcutta, you know. So we know Mother Teresa. You give that quote, nobody thinks, oh, well, you're endorsing that ideology. Same with St. Augustine, so I thought. That preacher came up, and that's all he got out of that sermon.
The whole thing, huh?
Yeah, it was, really we shouldn't refer to Augustine as a saint. Well, I understood he was a very introverted man in some regards, and he was trying to help me. I was a young preacher at the time. I hadn't been preaching for all that long, and I tried to keep that in mind. But I began to identify him. I didn't expect the praise to be coming from his direction. I wasn't trying to get the wind in my sails from him. I just realized that's how he was. Time, trust, seeing me minister, I think in time took care of that. And he became more of an ally than a critic. And that's kind of what Chris was talking about a while ago, is demonstrating, proving yourself. Because see, when we go to a new work, whether you guys are talking about your first work or your fifth work, when you go there, you're an unknown commodity. You're not known, and so you're not trusted as you will be eventually as you prove yourself. I just realized I have to tell you this, and keep in mind that this kind of a personality does need your compassion. There was a young lady, exceptional young lady, in a congregation where I preached, who one time before I got to preach, she said, "Hey, Mr. Neal, I have a book. I don't know if you know about this." No, I don't. Well, I have a journal. I keep up with all the mistakes that the preacher, the speaker makes. And I actually said, "That's what you do during the sermon?" And so don't you feel like you need to be trying to find out what you can glean from that? "Oh, I do that too, but I also do this." Well, I'm telling you, she was a kind of a person you look at and go, "I can't really find a weakness in her." I mean, she seems, godly, moral, spiritual leader, evangelistic, benevolent, helpful. But you can see what that was. That's pride. That's arrogance. She married a young man who was also of the same kind of a mentality, very superior-minded, and was allowed to be swayed by a professor, and today denies inspiration. I believe they attend a Church of Christ, but I'm not sure that they do. Nor do I think that they, and this was a girl that I would have said was very conservative. But you see, what she was looking for was mistakes. And what happens when you apply that to the church? The church on the human side is imperfect. On the divine side, it's perfect. And we can confuse that, and when we see the imperfections on the human side, we can begin to then doubt the divine side. And that opens up the door of the implications of which are great for one's own soul. So that critic may be dealing with a spiritual issue, you see. Well, so you keep that in mind, and I wish I could do that over again. I've been a little bit more compassionate with her, and maybe try to minister to her. Number 7, Mr. Never commend you. That's not why we do it. It's not why we serve. But everybody will tell you it's nice to get it, isn't it?
I think there's a lot of those. I think there is way more of those than the ones who do commend.
And we begin to ask ourselves, what drives that? Is it necessarily something sinister? And I don't think it is. I don't think that it's necessarily a morality or ethical or to some degree a godliness issue. Sometimes we just don't think about it. And of course we can exemplify that. We can find subtle ways to teach and to preach that, so that we make people more aware of the power of that. When I in the book I wrote about church growth, I talk about encouragement. That's a whole, and I've used this statement before. That's the one vitamin we're most deficient in is vitamin E. None of us are probably as encouraged as we need to be. And so I think people just, they are, for whatever reason, they think we're getting it sufficiently. And so they don't want to, what's the other end? We don't want to give them a big head. We don't want them to, to have an overinflated sense of their own importance, and so we won't contribute to that, not knowing that maybe others are thinking that same way. And it requires paying attention to details. I've mentioned that before in earlier lectures. I may have a spot later on where we need to make sure that we pay attention to little details. You get a little clipping in your newspaper and the local paper, and one of the kids, finishes third in a wrestling match. Well, it's not first. It's just a little local. Will you mention that to him? If you think to do that and say, really proud of our young people, old Joe Schmo finished third in a wrestling match here last week, and I know what kind of discipline it takes to get ready for something like that. What have you done for him? Even spiritually. My preacher, or, you're teaching somebody else. Somebody else goes up, I know my principal and my coach and everybody else said something to me, my friends from school, but now the guys at church did. And that may make a difference in how that person, functions and does. I remember one time we used to have somebody, just one family that did the communion preparation. And one of the elders got up. There's not even an elder here anymore, Sam Kennedy. He's passed away. He got up and spent 3 minutes talking about how crucial and vital that work was. Now you think about it. You don't need an advanced degree to do communion preparation. You don't even really need great expertise, but you want it done right, don't you? Sure. You want it done sanitarily. You want it done, you don't want to know that the bread's been used for the last 8 weeks. And so, and he just went into some great details. And that family was a kind of a poor, indigent. There's not a lot else that they could have done. But you should have seen, and it wasn't sinful pride, but the chest was way out, it was almost kind of a Barney Fife kind of response, I'm important. Well, he needed to be made to feel important, right? And that's the very thing that Charles is talking about. Never miss an opportunity, but realize there are going to be some times when you've done great good for the church, and nobody says anything about it. Just remember, it will not go unrewarded. That's exactly right. Another one you need help with. Number 8, I think it is in my notes. Mr. Watch how you spend your time. Mr. Watch how you spend your time. Remember when I said that the day can be divided into 3 categories: morning, afternoon, and evening? Good old brother so-and-so who drives by the church building at 8:03, and you're not there. Well, Pollard, I noticed you weren't down at the building there this morning at 8:03. Yes, sir, that's right. Well, I worked at this post office for 25 years, blah blah blah, and it was real important, that I be in that mail room right then to get started. Completely fictional, by the way. I don't know. I just threw that out there. Yes, sir, I do appreciate that. I went by the hospital this morning on my way in. Or I may choose to say, well, I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. And I don't give them any kind of answer at all. Because it's not really what I want to establish in my relationship. I don't want to find myself reporting to somebody, especially somebody to whom I am not to be reporting. Remember, we have ways to let elders know what we're doing. And Robert Oglesby probably mentioned that to you in the seminar. That kind of thing is what helps you with that guy. Is, well, you might want to just take your concern to our elders, if you have an eldership. Or, that's something for the next men's business meeting. When you have that weekly report, it's going to take the legs from underneath that criticism, you see. But usually that's a guy who's idle. Usually that's a guy who had a negative experience with a preacher, and it's a punishment ploy. It's not very frequent. The good thing is, these are just things I just don't want you to find yourself in a local work, and all of a sudden this guy shows up, and you're thinking, where did this come from? He's there. He's there wherever you go. He's there. Number 9, Mr. Take up all your time. I think we've talked about him, haven't we? Waste your time. And I think we've talked about how to deal with him. Number 10, Mr. We need a sermon on. I've had a couple of those here. And I've had them everywhere I've been. And you know what his problem is? I don't think I've had a woman to be that way. What is his problem versus you and your perspective?
I think he's looking at it from a perspective of someone else's weakness and they want you to preach about it so they would know what they're doing is wrong.
And not uncommonly, it's somebody related to them.
Yeah.
Somebody that they walk down the aisle with, or something like that. But here's the other thing. Here is their view, right here. And what's your view as the preacher, if you're doing your work right? You see it all. And he doesn't have the entire perspective. Now, a lot of times it'll be somebody who's maybe bent one way or the other. I'm talking about on the extreme. It may be somebody who, if they hear anything that's not love, grace, heaven, and joy, then, man, you're really messing it up. And just as often, you can find the guy who is, if they can't feel the brimstone, man, you haven't preached that day. And so they're gonna always be directing you toward their bent.
I am one man.
You're not the mouthpiece of somebody like that. And so what you do is you say, well, I appreciate that. I certainly will give it thought. Any criticism, there might be any advice. You might find a grain of truth in. But what you can say is, if you have an eldership, I discuss with the elders very often as they shepherd, and they're going to give an account for our souls, what they think is needed. And I can assure you this, I'm going to always try to be balanced and to preach the whole counsel of God. And I'll go back and check my records and see how long it's been since I've preached on that. May have been a long time. See, what are you doing? You don't end with blood on anybody's nose, right? Everything is redirected. You're a Christian, so you're going to answer it in a way that honors Christ. You're going to find ways to disarm without submitting yourself to unreasonable requests and thoughts. All right, next, Mr. Questions to no benefit. He'll often show up in a Bible class. He's the one that loves to raise questions, to be the philosopher, but he never wants to come to a conclusion. Nor does he want you to come to a conclusion. He's also the guy that is really, really intensely interested in how many angels exactly do fit on the end of a pen. But he's not so concerned with the basics of, what does Jesus say in Matthew 23? Judgment and mercy, these things. The one that was all concerned with the anise and the cumin and the incense and the tithes of those little small things. Jesus said, that's the minors. They want to major in the minors and then neglect the majors. Number 12, I think in my notes. Mr. Brother Jones, our former preacher, did this, was this. Something I think we have mentioned, I know we have, is that we're very careful not to speak ill of the former preacher because someday that will be us. And we want to certainly observe the golden rule, plus we don't have half the story standing in front of us. We don't have the whole picture. But neither do we need to try to find ourselves living in the shadow of a man who's going to have different strengths and different weaknesses than we do. And I'll tell you this, and there's no hard and fast rule. I do have a suggestion. I came here after the preacher had been here 23 years. The last work I went to, I was only the second preacher. The other fellow had started that work and was there for over a decade. It's not an easy thing to follow a man who's been there that long, because to be there that long, typically, you are well loved, you're doing some things very well, and you make a lot of relationships. And so you just have to realize that that's the case. If you accept to go to a work like that, so my suggestion is study it very carefully before you go to a work where a man's been there a long time. There's a joke that you may or may not have heard, but a lot of times they refer to the guy that comes in after the guy who's been there a long time as the sacrificial lamb. You build the bridge for the next guy that can come in, but if you follow the guy who's well up and been there a long time, it can be very difficult. You have to realize that you're not that guy. You may not be the counselor that he was. You probably, you look at that. You may not be as skilled in soul winning by success that somebody else is. I know some preachers that just have a better ability to do that. But you got to look and see, what do you do better? Maybe not as polished in the pulpit as he was, but you have to demonstrate, and you can in time, your worth and your value. Yes, sir.
And two experiences. One about a week ago recently when I went to Virginia, where a little old lady, I was speaking to the preacher, and a little old lady came up and she said, no, she told the presiding preacher, you need to preach more like him. I mean, like, right in, I felt so uncomfortable when she
So
made
did
that
he,
statement.
probably.
I believe he did. And the way she just went about it, and she did, right there, it wasn't secret. She was telling Peter, you need to preach more like him. And I'm like, man.
She said to that dude,
Yeah, to the preacher that was right there.
Oh, and he said to the other one that he should preach like you.
Yeah.
That you should, okay. Now,
That's messed up.
yeah, there's a different way you deal with that, no matter which side you're on. Here's what you do if you're the guy who is on the receiving end of that, and you're being told to preach like the other guy. Very graciously, thank you very much. Oh, and then compliment the other preacher. Now, if you're that preacher who's being told that, and I've been on that side going back, you find out what you know that person does well, and you say, and you put yourself in the second position. I cannot imagine being as efficient at really getting involved in people's lives as Brother Jones. I don't know anybody that does that better. So either way, what you're trying to do is you're trying to take the focus. If you're the one that's being complimented, you deflect that praise to them. If you're the one that's being compared, just graciously accept that and try harder, but don't let it live with you, because that's their problem. It's not necessarily your problem. And you know, we talk about common sense, but what do we always say?
it's not always common.
It's one of the biggest misnomers there is. Common sense just ain't. I don't know how else to say it. And so people don't use the discretion and good judgment that you think that they ought to. It happens. But just glean what you can from that. But try to continue to remember that you are who you are. Work on your weaknesses, and don't let your strengths lag. Number 13, I think it is. Mr. Chip on his shoulder. Pretty self-explanatory. Looking for a fight. Just wanting you to cross it. I don't know if any of you guys are old enough to remember that Robert Conrad commercial with the battery. It was alkaline, the Duracell, whatever. Yeah. Yes, he's there, and you know, it's not fruitful to engage, because somebody like that probably does not have social credibility, and you're just going to drag yourself to their level. Something I have always tried to, and I've been told this as well, is when somebody is like that, take the high road. Because if you'll take the high road, the people who are observing, they're going to see the different way you two operate, and they're going to see that you're the one that's trying to live like Christ. You're the one trying to live on a higher plane, and they'll see them for what they are. Most people can see them for who they are. And then, Mr., we're not getting equal time. This usually is in the context of worship. It's the song leader, you know. I gotta have my equal time. I don't want to get slided. Or the guy, you know, sometimes you have folks that are frustrated preachers, and they show up in two places. They're the prayer leader and the Lord's Supper presider. And they, you know, this is their opportunity to preach. And they're going to give it a good 20 minutes. I had a guy held a meeting one time, and the guy that led the prayer, I mean, he preached the prayer, and it went 20-something minutes. Normally, I don't measure. I'm not sitting there in worship doing that. Guys, at some point, they have paid for me to come there and preach. And you know what? It doesn't matter. If that time is gone, the clock's still running when you get up there. 20, I can't remember. It was over 20 minutes. Not quite 25. So somewhere in that time. The prayer. So.
Well, prayer's not preaching.
No, it's not.
Yeah,
no,
far from it.
But the meter's running.
Crazy.
You know, and now it's 7:30, and there's 2 more songs, and you haven't even gotten up to preach yet. I hate to bring this person up because I really don't know, outside of talking to them, what you can do to combat that. Just realize that personality exists, and it's often a matter of pride. Don't find yourself on that level. Don't find yourself being proud.
Don't schedule them to pray.
Say again?
Don't schedule them to pray.
Well, that's right. What you do is you go to the guy, the deacon or whoever it is who's in charge of arranging the worship, and you maybe try to find a different place they can say it. All right. That's just kind of a picture to paint for you. Any questions or comments about that? That's not meant in any way to discourage you. I just don't want you surprised because they exist. And typically you handle them the same way. It's kind of what George Bailey used to say, the preacher, not the guy from the Christmas movie. But he said, what does the moon do when all the little dogs are barking at it? Just keep shining. That's all you can do. And just realize that's all they are. What's the difference between the moon and the dogs, right? The moon's gonna be there when that dog's beheaded, you know, so. All right, that's all I got on that one. Let's move on to the preacher as the administrator. We can at least introduce that today.
I thought you was gonna say the dogs get moved.
They do, well, literally they do, yeah. Charles King. I was kidding. I'm just kidding. They probably would have figured that out anyway.
For sure.
The preacher as the administrator. Let's deal with some definitions first. An administrator is a person responsible for running a business or an organization. It's also defined as a person who performs office duties in some spheres. Oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's a person who performs official duties in some spheres. Now, why would we talk about the preacher and administrator when that primary definition doesn't sound like what our work is supposed to be? You read 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, a person responsible for running a business. Who, in our organization, the church, who does God put there?
The elders? Business?
All right, so, and let's parse it a little bit. Let's divide it up. Certainly, the head of the church is Christ, and all things in heaven and earth, all right? The elders are overseers. The men who conduct the business of the church, run the business of the church, are supposed to be deacons. Now, we all understand, we've heard the joke about the preacher does the elders' work, the deacons' work, deacons don't know what to do. That's kind of, that can get muddied in the water, but functioning as it should, and if you don't have elders and deacons, what you have are men who are tasked variously through committee, through volunteering, they get those things done. So why would we talk about the preacher as an administrator when technically that's how the church is organized?
You know, some places you're not going to have all that. Anybody can help you.
Okay?
You're going to have to do it on your own.
Officially, in an appointed sense, in some places, in many places, you don't have elders and you don't have deacons, or there's a lack of organization even when those do exist. But when you are hired to preach, and we'll talk about this more in just a moment, you can see it even on the screen. When you are hired with the understanding that you will do, underline do, certain things that are administrative in their nature. Now, you don't have to write to get this down, but I want you to hear something that James Baird said in the Christian Chronicle many, many years ago. He wrote that most preachers suffer from an acute case of role confusion. He said the church has defined the preacher's role as that of serving a group of Christians, making up a given congregation by teaching them and preaching to them. Number 2, being the primary administrator of the church's affairs under the guidance of the elders, and doing the work of the shepherd in tending the flock, visiting the sick, and admonishing the faint-hearted. We can say that's not fair, but it's pretty common. His main point is that God's definition of a preacher is different than that definition that the congregation imposes. And sometimes, if we're not careful, he can be thought of simply or solely as the administrator, the office manager, the guy who keeps everything running from an administrative standpoint, not financially necessarily, but otherwise. But, having said that, the preacher does serve in a vital capacity to be the spark plug in the congregation. I think I shared that statistic with you. Different guys say it's different time frames, but they say that the church takes on the personality of the preacher after a given point. Some say as little as 3 years, typically 5 or 6 years. That's humbling to me. Because if a church has no life, I'll tell you what, I won't tell you what part of the country it was, but I think it was last year, I preached at a congregation on Sunday morning. And, I mean, that wasn't the preacher's fault, but down to the lighting. I mean, it was one of those auditoriums, it was dark, it was disconnected. And I'd already gotten a chance to visit with him a little bit. I mean, he was had very little personality whatsoever, and no evident enthusiasm, no seeming passion at all. He was just kind of, he almost seemed like the clock puncher, Don't know that, and I'm not trying to make an indictment about him, but he had been in that congregation for years and years and years. So when I got up to teach Bible class, the first thing that impressed me, was there was not much effervescence or spirit in the congregation. I mean by that, enthusiasm, zeal themselves. And when I got to teach the Bible class, I wondered what he dealt with week after week. Actually, no, in the Bible class was during worship. It was a fan-shaped auditorium, and the closest person to me was like 17 rows from the front. Wow. And it's a big auditorium, and they had kind of shrunk, as you might think, with no, why am I here kind of thing. Well, what I did was, in preaching, instead of preaching from the pulpit, I asked if it was okay. All right, so I want you to envision this. There's the stage, it's up high, and then there's about 10 feet, there's the Lord's Supper table. On the other side of that, there's a gap, and then there's all these rows. So I would have had to preach across that chasm. How connected can you be that far back? Now, I'm not saying, and by the way, what I did was I just went all the way up to row 16, and I preached from right there, and I tried extra hard to engage, to connect, and to be passionate. But the congregation takes on your personality, and what you emphasize is what they emphasize. What's important to you is what's important to them. Now, the thing is, every work's different, right? You're doing this with your projects. You go into a congregation where there's been a split, you don't handle that the same way you do if you go into a congregation that's full of new Christians. Or if it's a congregation where there's been a moral indiscretion, the preacher had to leave under those circumstances. You don't handle, so you engage that word. But you are a spark plug wherever you go, to whatever end. If you come into where the split is, you're trying to bring peace. If you come in where there's new Christians, you're doing a lot of fundamental teaching. You come into an older established congregation where they're not evangelizing, you get known, trusted, loved, and then you start pushing them in that direction to be more evangelistic in their thrust. So anyway, you are a spark plug, and so I think there's some value to this, obviously, or I wouldn't be taking up your time talking about it. But by administrative matters, I mean matters that somehow relate to preaching. So I've got some of them there, and I'll identify them. It is an administrative function for you to go and visit. Do we need to spend time with why you visit as a preacher? Or do you have a good grasp of that? Is it your job as a preacher to visit?
It's your job as a Christian, isn't it?
That's it. And that's how I've always answered that in my mind. I don't want to be that proud person who says, and I've known even a couple of very well-known preachers who say, it's not my job to visit. I preach and I teach. And that's, the elders need to, and it may be that elders need to be visiting more, but common sense tells you, why do you visit? It helps you to know, to be known, to have trust, empathy, love, but it is an administrative function. How about a visitation program? Sometimes that will fall to you. Counseling is an administrative function. You're going to keep records, same as with visiting. You're going to funnel that information elsewhere as you can. This is the first place I've worked where there are actually in my job description some things about office management that I'm responsible for, the secretary that I'm responsible for, any other ministers on staff, to kind of coordinate, to carry needs in bad situations if there's any dereliction of duty, to work with them to try to get them over that, and if that can't be resolved, to be a liaison with the eldership. But you're going to be at a place where who orders the copy paper? who sees to it that the copier man gets let in the building? You say, well, that's just not fair. Well, it may not be, but it's going to be something that'll fall to you in times. Idea and program generation. The idea man. Well, hopefully that's something you're getting equipped to do here. Some of that you'll have ideas and thoughts about anyway. And I've already mentioned supervision of other staff, a little bit different from office management. Communication, you will probably find yourself at times doing the bulletin. Or maybe dispensing information via email. And obviously, public speaking, there is the primary function of that, which is to teach, to preach, to convict, to persuade, to motivate, but you are the face of the congregation. Some other things that are under the other there, Bible camp. My job here is to coordinate seminars, gospel meetings, special speaking engagements. A new members program. I mean, so there, you could probably add some other things there. Vacation Bible school. It's been a blessing here that I haven't had to do that, and I enjoy doing it. When I was in Virginia, being the coordinator of VBS was not just getting up and MC. There's all that goes along with that. Teachers meetings. I've never been in a congregation that I can remember where we ordered material. Every place people want to do it themselves, which I think, I have good friends that actually write the material. I think that's the better way to do it. You get more people involved. They have more skin in the game. And it's fresh. It doesn't seem like it's out of a box. And so there's administrative pieces to that. So that's what I want us to talk about here. When we talk about leadership, and you as a preacher who leads, here are some things to think about from a scriptural standpoint. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11 through 16. Paul's talking to the church there, but the preacher for that church is his protege, the man who's his son in the faith, Timothy. And so keep that in the mind in the background. Yes, sir.
What is it? The two scriptures are for?
We're still by way of introduction here.
Okay.
And the preacher as an administrator. Some scriptural insight into that. All right, Paul says in Ephesians 4:11, and he gave some as apostles and some as prophets and some as evangelists and some as pastors and teachers for, notice verse 12, the equipping of the saints for the work of service. How do you get that done? There's administrative components to that. The second part, to the building up of the body of Christ. Now, how do you build up the body of Christ? Any number of ways that are scriptural that you can do that, but no matter which one you're employing or which ones, you've got to be organized. You can't just haphazard, willy-nilly, just slap it on the wall and see what sticks. You've got to be organized. You've got to go about it. That's administration. Then he says, until we all attain to the unity of the faith, the knowledge of the Son of God, to a mature man, the measure of the stature that belongs to the fullness of Christ. As a result, we are no longer to be children tossed to and here and there by waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by craftiness and deceitful scheming. But speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects into Him who is the head. Administrative components enter in right here as well. And then, of course, verse 16, from Him the whole body being fitted and held together by what every joint supplies, there's administrative work that goes into that, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body. All right, so how do I know if Sally Joe is this kind of a worker, or now all that falls to me, nor should all of that fall to me. But who are the elders going to rely on?
You.
Here's what's going to be typical. If you are conscientious in your work, if it's a church of 50, if it's a church of 500, and I think this should be a goal that you have. If I have always tried to be in the position that I don't want an individual elder to know more people than I do. Now, They have a different responsibility to God for those people. They bear a different relationship than I do. And it's not a competition. I'm going to know more than the elders do. It is a following their example or even trying to exceed that example to show them how we need to relate to people. I want to be able to look at them when they say, where's old brother Fred Wade? I want to be able to know Fred Wade, where he is, and what's going on with him.
Yeah.
Now, why? Is that my job? Well, I don't know. I'm not sure where that squeezes in 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, but I realize to be effective as a tool in the hand of our Lord, I want to. I want to care about it. The whole 3rd section of this class is about the preacher and people, and our life revolves around the lives of those people. They are a significant part of our life, and so I want to know about what's going on with them. And I feel bad if I don't know.
That should be our attitude. You want to, not that it's part of your job.
That's exactly right. And it makes all the difference. But here's, I'm to the point where I've got to be very careful that others don't do this full time. There's a lot of folks, the church doesn't have to get that very big before they say, I'm not sure I know who that is. Well, why not? There's several reasons. Maybe they're a Christian who's never taken good root, so they're on again, they're off again. Maybe they've been shut in since that person got there. Or maybe they keep themselves confined to a small group of the congregation so they don't know others, even somebody who's there every week. But that's not us. We're reaching out and we're involved in their lives. So what Paul says in Ephesians 4:11-16 I think is very germane because we are preachers and we're teachers. We have a hand in helping the church be built up, to grow, to do what it can do. That's administrative. All right, when you look at 1 Timothy, there's a lot of that about administration. 1 Timothy 2 and 3 deals with the church's administration. Helping the church with doing worship God's way. Helping the church's leadership and service. 1 Timothy 4 deals with helping people with their lifestyle, living the way they should. 1 Timothy 5 deals with subgroups in the congregation, practical problems the church faces. But who is Paul writing to? He's writing about elders, right? He's writing about deacons. He's writing about men and women's roles. He's writing about the teaching and hearing. He's writing about the widows and the care of certain family members. But who does he say it to? Timothy. Who's Timothy?
Preacher.
He's the preacher. So how is Timothy to carry that out? Now listen, I'm not talking evangelistic authority. I'm one of the biggest opponents to that. It hurts the church to try to reside or rest authority in a single man when the church has an outline, it has a structure. But I'm talking about, I see myself as a servant of Christ, as an arm, a help of the elders, of the deacons, of the members to help the church be an Ephesians 4:11-16 kind of church.
So in other words, he should not put himself in a position to be an EIC. Oh, sorry. I think Mr. Dave was saying that yesterday, evangelist in charge.
Oh, yeah. The evangelist in charge. Yeah. And that's, and Nariah, you'll understand when I say this, because things will be probably different in the culture where you are. There are certain problems that are predominantly, are problems where a congregation is predominantly white. I hate to say that because I don't like to even give in to that mentality because there's not a white heaven, a black heaven, a yellow or red heaven. There are some problems, and this is in the American context more, where there are problems that predominantly black congregations deal with that others don't. That has been one has found itself a problem in predominantly black congregations more often, and that's what we call evangelistic authority, where I've seen situations where the preacher, he controls the finances. He basically may even have elders occasionally, but they're figureheads. So they're puppets that listen and follow his leading, and it's not biblical. And that's why God, even in an eldership, he didn't come up with, it's not an elder, it's elders. And we'll talk about the preacher and elders and those relationships. No elder has the right to arbitrarily make decisions. We get that, right? But then it happens. It happens frequently. And if a man shows himself prone to that, I say, well, what does the eldership think about that? Because now I'm in subjection to the elders. They hire me, they fire me. They are in one sense those to whom I answer. But what about an individual elder? Is he in subjection to the eldership? Absolutely. And so he can't arbitrarily make decisions unilaterally is the word I'm looking for. Where somebody says, just go and buy that copier. Okay, when did, I don't have time to talk to the elders. You just go ahead and do that. No, it doesn't work that way. Brother, I love you. I need to find out what the eldership thinks about this. So the same thing happens when a preacher finds himself immune from any kind of accountability. But I'll get a little off the subject there at the end, but we'll get back on Thursday. Romans 1:14 through 17 will be what we begin with. And Chris, why don't you lead us in a word of closing prayer?
Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you again for bringing us back here and to learn some very practical things that we need to be looking out for and things that we need to be doing when we get out into the field. God, thank you so much for Mike and his willingness to come here and teach us a little bit about taxes. As much as we don't like to think about that, it's a part of our lives, and we need to do our best to try to be good stewards in that sense, Lord. God, thank you so much for all that you do. Thank you for this school. Thank you for Neal and his family. Lord, we love you. It's in your son's name we pray.